Well, good morning, everyone. This is Leslie Schaller. I'm the Director of Programs at the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks, or ACENET, and I am going to start out as your moderator today of a Fair Food System Summit. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes as people are admitted from the waiting room. So hold tight and we'll get started here just in a jiffy. Again, good morning, everyone. This is Leslie Schaller with ACENET. I'm going to start out as your moderator today for the Fair Food System Summit. We'll be giving it another minute or two as we admit folks from the waiting room. Good morning, everyone. This is Leslie Schaller, your moderator here for our summit this morning. We're just going to give it another minute as we admit all the folks in the waiting room, and we'll get started. Well, good morning, everyone. I bet we'll have more people joining us throughout the morning and early afternoon. My name is Leslie Schaller. I am the Director of Programs at the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks, or ACENET. ACENET is one of the anchor organizations that serve on the steering committee of the Central Appalachian Network. And you are here for Summit number 3. This is a very fascinating project. We're delighted to see a lot of returning guests this morning and anticipating and pleased to see many new faces on the summit call this morning as well. So this is all about creating a fair food system. These summits are really highlighting scalable solutions so that we can create community food systems. It's primarily presented by the Central Appalachian Network and the United States Department of Agriculture. But what we have also is some great sponsors that I want to highlight as well. And that's the Educational Foundation of America, the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, and the Sugar Bush Valley Impact Investments. They have all stepped up and helped us sponsor these 6 summits. So we have another action-packed agenda here today. Just a quick overview. We have a lot of representation from many partners and stakeholders doing this tremendous work throughout Central Appalachia. And if you've been on the summit in number 1 and number 2, you've probably also seen that we always feature a presenter from the USDA. So we have Ashley Mueller today here this morning. Alex, one of our co-organizers from USDA, will be introducing Ashley in a minute. We also have, I think, a really exciting agenda planned that is particularly topical. We're going to have a number of partners and stakeholders who have been responding to the catastrophic flood most recently in Eastern Kentucky. So one of my great heroes is going to be on our call today at 9:40. That's Gwen Johnson of Black Sheep Brick Oven, Bakery, and Catering. And then we'll hear a little bit from many of the nonprofit partners, many of the anchor organizations within the Central Appalachian Network. And they're going to talk about how nonprofits have been responding to the challenges of flood relief and really highlighting some of the expectations of what's next. Then we'll take an active break. You can step away from your desktop or from your laptop, and Jennifer is going to, again, lead us on a more engagement process so that we can get some feedback. Most of these agendas are set up encouraging engagement. So our question today, and we'll be using a Jamboard, you'll see the link in the chat, is what does climate resilience look like in Central Appalachia? It's really important for us to have a two-way conversation within these summits. So please participate. We learn a lot from the input that we've gotten in our previous summits, and probably many more input sessions to come. Then we'll shift again to Rural Action, and Debbie Phillips and Paul Patton. They're going to talk about climate resilience and climate smart agriculture. There's a new CAN working group that's emerging, and Paul is the co-lead on that working group, and he'll be giving some sort of infomercials, I guess, in terms of how people can become more participatory in the Central Appalachian Network working groups. And then we're going to wrap up with two of our philanthropy partners, Lindsay, and I probably don't know how to say her name right, Kasich from the Lee Initiative, and Laura Smith from the Foundation for Appalachia, Kentucky. And then we'll do the wrap up. So that's what we have on board for you today. Just a reminder, you can always visit cannetwork.org and get all the information on the past summits. We have links to the recordings. So if you missed sections in your past attendance, or if you didn't have a chance to participate in Summit 1 and Summit 2, you can go back and look at those at your leisure as well. We're also trying to be as open source as possible. So if you work throughout Central Appalachia or work in your community where you feel a project or a model really needs to be lifted, we're very interested in hearing from other folks. We want to make sure that anything that's happening throughout the region gets shared, that we start to connect with more folks doing this great work to create a fair food system for Central Appalachia. So our goals, this is bread and butter for CAN. It's all about facilitating a learning environment. We're engaging with coalitions to healthy community food systems throughout the region. We're employing targeted technical assistance from USDA. So you'll notice that we always have a lot of our USDA partners engaged within these summits. I think that two-way street in terms of communication is really important as we move forward. So the goal is to attract more federal, public, and private funding, we want to invite more nonprofit partners within Central Appalachia to work on related projects to the network. So I'm going to pass the baton off to Alex here in a minute, and he's going to introduce Ashley. But I would encourage everyone to put in the chat a little introduction of themselves, who you are, what many hats you might be wearing, professional or personal, and maybe a little bit about what area of Central Appalachia you work in. And then we have a better idea of who's in the Zoom room with us today. So I'm going to pass the baton now to Alex, and he'll take it away.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today, for continuing participating in these session series. It's been an amazing experience. It's always great to hear stories from the ground, even if it is related to disaster response and recovery, but always great to hear the innovation that folks are leading. So we really want to say many thanks to Dr. Ashley Mueller for taking the time to join us today. Ashley is a national program leader at USDA's National Institute for Food and Agriculture. I'll let her talk a little bit more about the agency, but they implement a variety of programs that support higher education institutions, as well as community-based organizations and many other partners on the ground. And they play a big role in disaster response and recovery as well. So I guess I'll just turn it over to Dr. Mueller.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Alex, and good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I do have some prepared slides, so I will share my screen and then jump right in. So just give me one moment. All right. Hopefully, can everyone see that okay? We good? Thumbs up? Yeah?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you for the affirmation. Once we go to like screen share, it's always like, is anybody out there? But as Alex shared, I am with USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and I do serve as a national program leader. It has been a really fun job. I joined NIFA. Actually, I just celebrated my NIFA birthday last week. So I've been with NIFA for a little over a year. Prior to that, I was with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with their cooperative extension service. And you're going to hear me talk a little bit more about that in general, the National Cooperative Extension System here shortly. So it was a really natural fit. I did disaster work there. And so really understand what disaster response looks like, especially with an organization that is affiliated with USDA. So before we begin, I do want to share our non-discrimination statement with USDA. In accordance with federal civil rights laws and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Civil Rights and Regulations and Policies, the USDA, its agencies, office and employees, and institutions participating in or administering USDA programs are prohibited from discriminating based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, gender identity, which includes gender expression, sexual orientation, disability, age, marital status, family or parental status, income derived from a public assistance program, political beliefs, reprisal or retaliation for prior civil rights activities in any program or activity conducted or funded by USDA. Remedies and complaint filing deadlines do vary by program or incident. So information has been provided on this slide for anyone who would seek alternative means of communication, as well as to file a program discrimination complaint. USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender. So I am going to talk about USDA NIFA's disaster response. So this is, I think, a really, this is a fun topic for me because my background does, as I shared, include disaster education from an extension lens. And so I was connected to NIFA well before I joined NIFA as an extension educator, and have learned a lot over the years, as well as have had an opportunity across our funding programs to understand how and what NIFA does to play a role in local disaster response. One of the things you're going to hear me say more than once this morning is that all disasters are local. You may have heard that already, right? It is the local response and the local coalitions and community members that can really strive together to make a difference and address community needs in real time. And so I'm going to cover what USDA NIFA is, because if you're like me, you may appreciate context and understanding connectivity here. So I'll share a little bit about what we do as an agency. And then I'm going to touch upon 3 specific aspects of what we do and just really hone in and kind of bring this all together this morning. So the first is I'll cover what the Cooperative Extension System is, as well as then the Extension Disaster Education Network. And then finally, a funding opportunity that NIFA just released in this fiscal year called Rapid Response to Extreme Weather Events. So USDA NIFA. So we are a federal agency within USDA, and we actually do extramural funding opportunities for a variety of higher education institutions, businesses, nonprofit organizations. And so our real main focus is to address agricultural issues that impact people's lives and really our nation's future. So I like to think of it as food, fuel, fiber, and families. So really the gamut of research, education, and outreach or extension in agricultural issues. So I just mentioned research, teaching, or education, and outreach or extension. So our approach to funding is really unique because we take an integrated approach to that. So we want to ensure that these scientific discoveries are not only discovered, but they are actually brought to the people who need them. So our goal is to help people make informed decisions about what's going on in their lives, their families, and their communities. You know, research is great, but unless it actually gets out to the people that need it, right, what good can it do? So really our goal is the application of these discoveries and this innovation across the country. So we do partner with land-grant university system, and I'll share more about that here when I talk about cooperative extension. And as I mentioned, we also partner with government, private, and nonprofit organizations. So we have funding opportunities, and we have the RFA calendar, the request for applications calendar is what we call that, available on our website that anyone, including anybody here on this summit call today, can look into and find out more about opportunities that may be a good fit for your organization, or topically a really great fit for what you're working on with your partners. And so we have varying application deadlines depending on the funding program, and do of course encourage partnership. So I know that there is a lot on this slide, but you know, there's a lot to USDA, and I wanted to provide some context here about where it is that NIFA sits within USDA, in case you kind of like to make connections as well. So we are specifically tied into the research, education, and economics mission area. So I have here on the slide, I've denoted with the large orange rectangle, you'll see the REE mission area. And then NIFA has that charcoal colored rectangle there. So you'll see that we also are in stride with the Office of the Chief Scientist, Agricultural Research Service, ARS. Oftentimes that's a familiar name to folks as I talk about what we do with NIFA. National Agricultural Statistical Service, as well as the Economic Research Service. Many of you on the call, though, may also work with or know USDA professionals in our other mission areas. So, for example, when I think about local USDA presence, over on the very far left of your screen, you'll see the Farm Production and Conservation mission area. So Farm Service Agency is one USDA agency that has a local presence, as well as the Natural Resources Conservation Service, also NRCS. And so I'm trying to make the connection here that USDA is in fact local, as I'm sure many of you know, but had to just, of course, loop that back in here this morning. So speaking of local, this is, I think, something that is really unique about USDA is our relationship with states. And our relationship is that we support and offer capacity funding to the cooperative extension system. Sometimes this is referred to as the Extension Service. Sometimes it's just generally called Extension. Essentially, Cooperative Extension is the outreach arm, so that public engagement and non-formal education partner of the land-grant university. And so we do this system is operated then through the land grants, but NIFA isn't the only partner with that land grant university. There are state and local governments who also partner with that land grant to ensure that cooperative extension is enabled and mobilized in states all across the country. So our role as NIFA is that we develop methods to essentially address national priorities. We have legislatively mandated funding that we award in the forms of grants, as well as we provide programmatic leadership. So I serve as a national program leader, and I oversee several programs in the areas of what we call civic engagement and leadership. And my programs essentially focus on disaster education and disaster response. And so I get to participate in groups like yours, as well as with other federal agencies and partners to really determine where that we can make some strides and opportunities to really build effort around addressing these critical needs that we see in society. So Extension is the nationwide non-credit educational network. So I want to be really give that some attention, because a lot of what Extension does is not tied to the credit or tuition that we often think of with the higher education system, but rather it is about just addressing public needs in real time. And so if you've heard of the 4-H program, I know 4-H is a very popular, it is affiliated with the Cooperative Extension System. That is the premier youth development program offered through Cooperative Extension. Other extension education efforts include Master Gardener support. So Master Gardeners are volunteers that essentially provide support in identification of pests, helping small or just individuals with their garden questions. And so Extension really does a lot to help be responsive at the local level. And again, as I shared earlier, to reiterate the point of what we do with the NIFA and our integrated approach, we want to see research into action, right? To get that information and that science that's generated on these campuses and through these grant dollars out to the people who need them. And so Extension is really that arm to get that information into the hands of the people who are needing it and or want it. So this is just a schematic here that we have on our website that really, I think, shows the I don't want to say complex, but the, I think bigger picture of the relationship that is in relationships rather that are involved in supporting the cooperative extension system. So on the far left, you can see here, that's the federal partnership. So that's USDA and that's NIFA, as well as other organizations and associations and operations that really feed into what it is that we do at the federal level to get that information out to the states. Within that state level there, right in the middle, that orange gear, you'll see that is the land grant university. And this is affiliated, of course, as I shared, or the extension rather, is affiliated with land grant universities. And feeding into that are those academic departments, so those degree homes, if you will, on these campuses, as well as the experiment stations. So experiment stations are really the home for the research that is being conducted at these universities. Need to also make sure that I mention that state government agencies, as well as those state organizations, associations, and businesses play a really critical role in the support of cooperative extension at the local level, or the state level rather. So perhaps providing some funding for capacity or salary dollars there, as well as partnerships. For example, when I was with Nebraska Extension as disaster education coordinator, worked really closely with the Emergency Management Agency in Nebraska to ensure that Extension was at the table for some of these key conversations regarding all phases of disaster management, but also became a programmatic partner as well to reach people that maybe were underserved or hadn't been reached prior to our engagement. And then finally, in the far right hand of your screen, you'll see that blue gear there. That is the local essence of extension. And an extension wouldn't be possible without the support of the state government or the local government, excuse me, who and many times will provide also additional professional staff support, office space, as well as volunteers. Especially in disasters, volunteers are incredibly important. And I think about our rural communities that rely on their own to either do debris management, volunteer management, all of the things, right? Volunteers are really that local. And as you heard me say earlier, all disasters are local. And as you can see here, extension is local too. At the local level, extension works with a variety of individuals and partners. Often our extension offices will use advisory boards or coalitions to inform their work to help them understand what those local community needs are so they can develop education and outreach opportunities that meet those needs. So extension is local. Extension is responsive, and extension is about addressing those public needs. And so when we think about disasters too, right? Disasters are local, they require response, and we know there are often many public needs that happen after disasters. So extension is really poised to be engaged, not only in all phases of emergency management, but definitely has a place in the response phase of disasters. So now I want to touch upon Eden, because Eden is affiliated with the cooperative extension system, but it is a unique group because it is a network of extension professionals across the country who have an interest in doing disaster work. So extension has professionals that have expertise in everything from agriculture, crop production, livestock production, to community and economic development, to 4-H youth development, early childhood, a whole food nutrition and health, wellness. And so these folks in all of these program areas come together because they have a specific interest to say, listen, I want to be engaged in this work, or I've experienced this firsthand. I know the power of what we can do as an extension group. Let's ensure that when disasters happen, we're helping our own through the cooperative extension system get information that they need to help the people in their areas. And so extension really uses a loose membership model. The institutions themselves are members, and those individual extension professionals are either delegates or points of contact. And so these includes professionals from land-grant universities as well as sea-grant extension programs. And these delegates, as I shared, have these varying backgrounds, but they work together in committees. So we have a Family and Consumer Sciences Committee and an Ag and Natural Resources Committee. They are practitioners themselves. So they're out in the local communities working, but they're also researchers. They're those folks doing that work on campus or at those research stations across states that are getting that information and then working in hand with those local extension professionals. Eden provides a platform for partnership and collaboration. So there are committee meetings, monthly executive committee meetings. Just recently, we've seen here what's been happening in Puerto Rico with Fiona, and through Eden and their structure, those extension professionals have been able to make some connections with the land-grant university in Puerto Rico, seeking ways that they can provide and support any sort of response. So it's kind of this network, familial type approach to ensuring that folks are being taken care of. Eden, I think, also is wonderful in their structure because they use what they call a response notes reporting system. So anytime there is an incident, local extension professionals can fill out that response notes reporting form. It goes straight up to that Eden organizing office, and then they can start basically matchmaking. Right? So there's a need here in this state, and what can we do, or what resources can we gather to help those people there locally? Eden is actually one of my funding programs that is in my portfolio. So NIFA provides through the Food and Agricultural Defense Initiative an annual award to one grantee who essentially provides the operations or the infrastructure to support that nationwide network. So currently Purdue University in Indiana is the awardee there. And so they're the ones that are really keeping everything going, things moving, and on tabs with everything going on. I should also note that Eden, a huge part of what they do is capacity building. And so they offer training and learning opportunities for extension professionals who really want to engage in this work and would like to enhance their own skill sets as it relates to disaster response. So for example, one of the recent trainings that they've offered to the network included cultural competency in disasters. And so they've had several local programs offered there for extension professionals to increase their skill set around that. And I have provided the link here if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Eden. I know we have a lot of folks on from Kentucky, so I just shared information about Eden in Kentucky, though I do see, or I saw in the chat, folks in Ohio, as well as West Virginia. So I will just focus here on Kentucky and then encourage the other states, simply by either Googling or looking into your universities there. But Eden is of course, cooperative extension, and cooperative extension is Eden. So in Kentucky specifically, the University of Kentucky and Kentucky State University do collaborate, work together. Both institutions and their extension programs offer educational opportunities in a variety of program areas that you can see here listed on the screen. They do individual focused programming, as well as, like I said, collaborative. And so I think Kentucky is especially lucky because your state has been very engaged in Eden, and they have their points of contact that have been in touch, I know, with the Eden officers, as well as with me about the response efforts going on regarding that flood that happened here earlier this summer. In Ohio, your extension providers would be Ohio State Extension, as well as Central State University Extension, and then in West Virginia University Extension, and West Virginia State Extension. And folks can reach out at any point to their local extension professionals and their offices. What's great about extension is once you kind of hit that home page for that organization, there's oftentimes a find extension in my area or a directory for individuals to then seek out specific people to contact. And so it really is kind of a gateway to all kinds of resources and information, and perhaps potential partners. So finally, I just wanted to give some time and attention here on a new funding program that we have within NIFA, and that is called our Rapid Response to Extreme Weather Events Across Food and Agricultural Systems. You'll hear me refer to this as A1712. It's a lot, it rolls off the tongue a lot easier than the whole name, but we call it A1712 because it is affiliated, or it is offered through NIFA's AFRI program. AFRI stands for Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, and it really is our premier funding opportunity or flagship program. This rapid response program launched here this past fiscal year. And so it was created because we knew at NIFA that there was a need. There was a gap on response funding for work in food and agricultural systems as it related to disaster. And so this particular funding opportunity seeks to provide funding for projects that are either extension or integrated, which is research and extension. I want to note here, though, that extension isn't just limited to cooperative extension system entities. Extension here is broader. It includes outreach. So organizations who are not extension or affiliated with the land-grant university system are certainly eligible to apply for this funding opportunity. So this particular program is really focused on, as you've heard me say, we want to translate research into action. So we're about wanting to fund programs that rapidly deploy strategies and fill knowledge and information gaps. So we think about, right, what extreme weather and disasters can do, especially at the local level. And there are then direct needs related to food and needs for food related to agriculture and our supply chain that need to be addressed. So the idea here is that these projects should really buffer the effects of disasters and ultimately ensure availability of an accessible, safe, nutritious, affordable, and abundant food supply. What's unique about this specific program is that applications are accepted on a rolling application deadline, which is very different from our other NIFA funding opportunities. Therefore, these projects must directly address effects with an extreme weather event or disaster. So applicants really have the opportunity and need to justify their need for funding based upon localized impact. So, we're going to look, did an actual extreme weather event or disaster happen? Was there an incident of impact that really affected the local needs? So more details on this specific program is we're really looking for projects that can turn around or create deliverables within 3 months of the award start date. Projects are a year long, but again, we're about getting information, getting deliverables out to the people who need it. And so projects need to clearly describe that they're able to develop something, offer a training or create a resource or, translate materials, whatever it may be in a short turnaround, because this is compared to many of our other funding programs, 12 months is a very short award period. And so we want to see things happen. And then as I shared, tied to these applications must be tied to an actual weather event. So applicants really need to define that geographic scope as it relates to the weather event and their specific project. We are seeking applications in these 3 emphasis areas. And so applications may choose to address more than one. That is certainly okay, but we're asking that they at least have one of these areas that they address. And we do provide more information about what these specific emphasis areas are in the request for applications. But for now, they include agro-ecosystem resilience, commodity and nutrition security, and health, well-being, and safety. And so this slide, I think, is a really helpful slide because it shows essentially what those key characteristics are about A1712. We are funding projects up to $300,000, which includes those indirect costs. We are planning to award multiple or numerous awards, as I shared, 12-month project periods. And then related to this is our letter of intent. And so before an application is submitted, the project team submits a letter of intent. And this is to ensure that there is fit with the program. And in fact, that this project does align with an extreme weather event. As you can see here, this is all very expedited. If you've ever applied for a federal grant, you know that it can take a lot of time between submitting an application to hearing back on that decision. And with this particular program, we're pushing the envelope a little bit because we want to lean true into a true response effort. So I'm not going to go through all of this other than just to say here, this does reiterate my point that we are looking to expedite getting proposals reviewed, as well as then getting those award notices and actually making that award very, very quickly. And so we're talking a very, very quick start to finish here, which I said is very, very different. And because we also have this rolling application deadline, we feel like this was the most creative or innovative way to address this and really kind of own that response piece. And so I provided the links on this page. They may not do much for you here. I could probably put them in the chat once I'm done. But if you want more information on this particular program, you can certainly visit the link or just search NIFA rapid response or A1712. Information should pop up there. I did include our team's email address because we have a team of folks, national program leaders and others working on this program. And we are monitoring that inbox all the time. And so if you have a question, especially as it relates to response and seeing if maybe your project idea is a good fit, I highly recommend you reach out using our team address there so that we can get back to you as quickly as possible. So I just wanted to conclude by just showing again this slide. I did kind of cover a lot very quickly, but hopefully I made the connections here. That USDA NIFA does do disaster response. We may not be on the front lines, if you will, or ourselves as NIFA locally, but through the cooperative extension system and through the Extension Disaster Education Network, there are people and there is capacity there to partner locally to address those issues and just really make a difference and get people the information that they need to make good decisions for themselves and their families. We also have that rapid response funding opportunity that I shared as well. So this is, I think, another example of NIFA's commitment to being responsive when it comes to disasters and extreme weather. As we know, right, they're related to, a changing climate and the increase in frequency of these events. And so I'll finish here with, I think, an opportunity to take a few questions, but with my contact information. So I am certainly happy to field any emails or phone calls that you might have, and just would also encourage you that if you are at the local level or regional level, just to reiterate, please do contact your extension folks there and look into that. And I can certainly help you determine who that may be if you hit a roadblock in learning who that is. But they really do want to partner. Many of them may be partnering with you already, but I think it's a good opportunity to build some networks here and make things happen. So Alex and Leslie, I just appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and take some questions.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time, and what a neat program opportunity. I did see one come through in the chat from Martin regarding the LOI. It says it must be submitted within 14 days of a disaster, and specifically asking about Eastern Kentucky. But then I guess, where does that disaster declaration come from? I see Martin come on if you want to clarify a little bit of that.
Well, I can answer that. Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
No, it's just like 14 days, right? And I don't, it feels like for us in Kentucky, it feels like we're still in it, right? This thing is not over, even though the main event happened at the end of July. And I'm fascinated because this is what we are talking about, and I'll talk a little bit later. I just like, well, is it too late, right?
No. So I looked recently, and I think the incident period for the Kentucky flooding is still open. But this is where, when we designed this funding opportunity, Martin, we wanted to take great care in recognizing, right, the locality of incidents, and that those folks who live and work locally would have the context or understanding to say the time is now and the funding need is now. And so that's why we leave it to the applicant to justify, right, what that 14 days is. With this Kentucky incident, certainly, right, that FEMA declaration is related right there. But, in many cases, we recognize getting an actual declaration, especially in rural areas, can take a long time. And so this is where an applicant or project team can be working with local organizations to present data. Perhaps it's National Weather Service, or perhaps it's the local Farm Service Agency office. There's many different ways to be able to justify that in a letter of intent. And that's what we're encouraging applicants to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Kayla, for putting our link there in the chat. I really appreciate that.
Of course, no problem.
Well, I'm looking at the time, and if folks don't have any other questions, I think we will continue on. So I just want to say thank you again, Dr. Mueller. Really appreciate you being here. And I'll turn it back to Leslie.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is a great start to session number 3. So I'm going to share my screen for just a little bit. And I am so excited because I get to introduce one of my all-time heroes of Central Appalachia this morning. I got to know Gwen a couple years ago when she, and actually many other people on our summit today, became involved with the Central Appalachian Art Assembly. And that was a group of people who came together to really look at how we could take funding from the sunsetting of Art Place and put it in to more grassroots organizations in Central Appalachia. So I was familiar with Gwen. I knew of her work, but it was a pleasure to get to know her better throughout the many gatherings, the many meetings, the many Zoom calls we had working together to create this new Waymakers group. So if you're not familiar with the Waymakers, we'll encourage you to Google them. We'll put the link in the chat as well. But what I'd like to do right now is just turn it over to Gwen. And Gwen, I'm going to stop sharing screen for a minute. If you could just sort of introduce yourself, who are you? Where are you from? What got you started in creating a fair food system in Central Appalachia? So welcome, Gwen.
Thank you. It's good to see your face, Leslie. It's been a while. I am sitting in the Hemphill Community Center, and I was raised in this community. And we're housed in an old school building that my mom went to school in, I went to school in, and my kids went to school in. But it's no longer a school because they centralized our school system and took us out of here. But to get back to the food systems question, when I was a kid, we raised huge gardens, and I used to get so mad at my dad because he would work us like brutes in that garden, in those gardens, and he'd have fields of corn and fields of potatoes and all these different things, and he would work us so hard. And the other kids would be running up down the road on their bicycles, and there we'd be hoeing and weeding and all that stuff. And then I would get so mad because when it was harvest time, he would give all this food away. And I'd be like, why do we have to work all summer trying to raise that? Because I was just a kid and I didn't understand. So that legacy of trying to put food into the hands of folks who don't have food has always been a thing very near and dear to my heart because of those beginnings of hoeing and weeding, and we'd harvest those potatoes and have to carry all them. And then came the canning. And the thing I always hated was trying to empty the fruit jars from the year before to refill them. And I'd be like, why are we doing, why do we can all this? And then when nobody uses it, we have to dump it out and wash these dad burn jars and try to get them ready for more food. But now, and there wouldn't be a lot left over, but pickled stuff doesn't smell really pleasant to a little kid when they don't even eat pickled stuff. You know what I'm saying? And I just get so mad. But that's kind of my beginnings in trying to make sure that that people who don't have food always do have food. Now, here in the mountains, most of the coal mining families all had a vegetable plot. And the coal miners that are working, they still do. And I think that that's a therapeutic thing that coal miners do. They get their hands in the dirt and their, some sun on their heads, because I think a lot of times they deal with seasonal affective disorder from light deprivation. And I think that to grow the food to help supplement their tables with what has to be bought at the store has always been a coal miner's thing too. And this is a coal camp that this school is in and that I was raised in. And so it's just kind of been a legacy, and whoever didn't have food, everybody else tried to make sure they had food, that the children are fed and clothed and got shoes on their feet. It's always been a big push here.
Great. Well, Gwen and I worked on some slides so that, one of the things that is always important to me, and I know it is to Gwen too, is to honor the people in our places doing this hard work. So you're going to see a lot of pictures of folks and you're going to see a lot of photos of really enticing bakery products. So if you weren't hungry and you didn't have breakfast, you're really going to be starving now after you see this slideshow. But let's get started, Gwen, and maybe talk a little bit about the Hempel Community Center and Black Sheep Brick Oven Bakery.
Okay, so Hempel Community Center was established about 50 plus years ago. I think 54 years now. And the first one was housed in the old fountain in Hempel, which had been a coal company store. It wasn't the company store per se, but it was right across the road from the company store, where they did a little bit different thing, like prepare some food to sell and that sort of thing. And they had a little lunch counter in there or whatever. So the first one was there, and then the community lost that space, and they established a little park and used it for a meeting space. And then eventually it was on coal company land. Eventually they lost that space. And then when this school building came vacant, about 25, 26 years ago, we were able to secure the use of this building from the Letcher County Fiscal Court, and have been housed here ever since. Black Sheep Bakery was a way when the coal industry took a downturn. We had to have a funding stream for the community center, and we had always cooked and baked pies and cakes and cooked dinners or whatever, and had music events to raise money. And when we lost the partial funding that we had from the county, when there was no coal severance tax money left, we had to dream up a way to move forward without that help. And so we fell on this idea of a bakery where we would employ folks coming out of incarceration. And so this is second chance employment for some. We learned early on we couldn't hire all people who were coming out of incarceration during the opioid epidemic, because at times when folks are working together, they might all fall off the wagon at the same time. And the first summer that we were in business, that happened to us. And my young grandson and I about worked ourselves to death trying to hold a place for those folks until they got out of rehab. And so we learned that we had to hire some other people as well. So right now, you know, I can tell you that we've had some success and some failure working with the folks coming out of incarceration. We have 2 sitting in jail right now. This picture here is my nephew, and he was the main reason that I thought of this bakery project and presented it to our board of directors, because he was coming out of incarceration after he had been in the armed forces and went to Iraq and came out with PTSD, and he had some substance abuse issues before he went into the Army. And so when he came out, he was in pretty bad shape with PTSD, and he did some crazy things, got himself put in jail, sat in jail about 4 years, and he was about to come out of incarceration when we lost that funding from the county, and the senior citizen center that had been housed here, you know, was not going to be anymore. And they had always paid half the utilities, so we had to figure out a way to move forward. And so all that was in my mind, and the board met, and we were looking at latent assets, and we saw these folks in incarceration as a latent asset, an asset that we could use to move forward with this dream that we had to keep this place open. And so he was in first group of employees, but he was also one of the ones who went to rehab that first summer. And so we've really struggled in that way, but we've learned a lot, and we're moving along a whole lot smoother now than we did at first. It was a big learning curve. But we've been in business 4 years, so we've learned a lot of things.
Yeah, so beautiful brick oven. I mean, that must have been something to put together, Gwen.
It was. We got money there were some funders came to see us. And they were asking questions about our partnership with the Apple Shop. And one of them asked, did we have a wish list? And without even thinking, I said, we want a brick oven. And never dreamed that they would fund it, and they did. And there it is in the picture. As you can see at the front of it, we've had some trial and error with it too, because at first we had problems there were some trees at the back of the building that would not allow the smoke to leave the area as quickly as it should. And the smoke would come in and it blacked up the front of the oven, but I think it adds character. And then the other picture here is my friend, Aline hugging up to a loaf of bread that she loves so much.
Yeah, so let's look at some of the products. I mean, you just make an amazing array of different product lines. What are some of the popular items within your community?
Well, this daggone strawberry cream pie is all the rage. We make those and post them, and just as soon as they hit Facebook, people start calling, put me back one of them, and within 30 minutes, we won't have any left. They'll all be spoken for. The brownies there that are pictured are a hot item too. They were something that I made for my kids when they were small, and the folks have just taken a liking to them here around abouts. And so we get those calls on those too. Stick me back a pan of those brownies. I'll be there to get them in 30 minutes or whatever. And then the cream horns, people start calling just as soon as we open up to see if we've got them ready, and they come and get them by the dozen.
Great. And you've celebrated 4 years now.
Mm-hmm. We were 4 years old, June the 22nd.
Wow.
We're pretty proud of that, because I mean, through a pandemic, and you know, now through a flood, we were shut down during this flood about 6 weeks, and really worried, and people would call, when are y'all going to open? But we're running a distribution center out here, so we had to shift everything to reopen, and we didn't have any water for those weeks. And we were carrying water just to clean up or anything around here from a big tanker out here.
Yeah, so let's talk about all the flood response work that you and many of your colleagues and community members have been engaged in since the end of July. I mean, we have a lot of photos here, again, you know, acknowledging the hard work that so many folks are doing. So can you just talk a little bit about the impacts of the flood? You got started on what some of the bakery impacts were, but how about the community at large?
Well, the morning of the flood, I live up on the hill, and it had blown the window screen out of my window during the night, and it woke me up, and I could hear it raging, and it started leaking. The roof started leaking in the room where I was sleeping. So I got up and set pans and buckets and whatever, because my house has some tin on it, and it's a rather old roof. So the rain and the water was such that it just couldn't withstand it, and it started leaking. And so I really didn't think that much about what was going on down below, because I was fighting during the night the things that were happening at my house. And the next morning, I was up really, really early anyway, and I got ready and I thought, and I was almost fearful to come here to the center because I was afraid it was flooded. And when I rolled off the hill, my neighbors were out and all the culverts and bridges were washed out, and people were out trying to retrieve things from the creek and walking the roads. And I thought, well, I'll make, and the electricity was out and the water was out. And so I thought, well, I've got some bottled water, so I'll make a big kettle of chicken and dumplings. My first thought was comfort food for the folks out working, and then I'll get word to them so they can come down and eat. Well, I needed some cornmeal, and I started down the road and I passed up the center because I was still almost afraid to come in here. And I thought, well, I'll run down and get a bag of cornmeal, but we were cut off because right down below the center, the road was full of water and you couldn't go any further. And there was no traffic. If a car went down, it went about 2 or 3 minutes and then it came back up because you couldn't get down through there. And so I came back here and I scrounged around and made, got the chicken cooking and started with that. And then folks began to drift in because here we still had electricity and we had Wi-Fi miraculously. And so folks were coming here with their cell phones to try to contact loved ones to see if they were all right. And then they started coming in and telling me about the things that they had lost during the night. And they were walking the creek banks, trying to find their belongings. And I'll never forget that morning. I threw the door open and there was no floodwaters in this place, and we had not been flooded. And I was so thankful. And then the people started coming. And there was a guy who came in and he sat down and he just hung his head and he sat there. And I said, "Do you want coffee?" And he said, "When you go to bed and everything's there, and the next morning it's all gone." And I'll never forget those words. But we had a staff member here. He was in that picture of the group that you showed just a while ago under that tent. But he, that was him right there with that cantaloupe in that one. And yeah, right there, the big guy with the bandana. He lost everything he had. And he builds our fires and mows the grass and hauls in the firewood here for the brick oven. And he's somebody that we just love. And he lost his home up the holler here. And but he's making a comeback with the help of a lot of people showing him a lot of love. He's 2 years out of prison. And he is doing well. And then, this flood has been a trigger for a lot of folks with addiction because of the stress of it all. But miraculously, he is held true to his path, and he's been here every day trying to help other people. So he's been one of our volunteers here. And folks are helping him get his house reestablished. So they've torn down his house that he had, and he got one of those little tiny houses. And there's a group here, a disaster response team that's been coming and helping him get his tiny house ready for winter.
Wow. And I know you've had a lot of support from so many different partners, and then the farmers in the area I know have really pitched in as well. I think at the next summit, we're going to have some of the EKY farmers market managers talk about the pivot that they took, making sure people had food here during the flood relief period.
Yeah, so there's a farm down in Harmony, North Carolina that has hauled us cantaloupes and watermelons and cucumbers and 100 carts of green beans and tomatoes and okra. I could go on and on. They've just brought us the most wonderful things. And then the local farmers have brought watermelons and cantaloupes and tomatoes and lots of things. And we've been able to feed the people in the first days after the flood for about 3 weeks. Nobody still had any water up here. And so we had this big tanker of water out here. The first one said Indiana American Water, and the second one said West Virginia American Water. And they had 7,600 gallons of water on them, and we've emptied 2 of them.
Wow.
But the water's finally back on, as I said earlier, and we have been, but what I started to tell you is that for about 3 weeks, we cooked meals here every day and served them out and sent them out to the folks that, we first and foremost took care of the sick and the elders and the young mothers, with children. And then anybody else that wanted to eat could kind of come and get theirs, but we sent those meals out to them. And then folks walked in and ate, and folks would come and get like dinner for their family. So they'd come in and say, I need 6 or I need 3. And we would make trays for them and send them home with them. And so we fed the community out of here for 3 weeks. But now that the electricity's back on and the water's back on, then the burden has lifted on that somewhat, because folks are kind of getting back to normal a little bit anyway.
Mhm. Yeah, so what are some of the other things that you guys have put in place? I know, you're great placemakers and community engagers. So, as you said, a lot of this catastrophe is just a trigger. I mean, people are going through trauma, and if they have even PTSD or, substance use disorder, what are some of the things that the community is creating as a safety net, I guess, to build that social capital and support people emotionally as you go through this reconstruction period?
Well, we've had some story circles, kind of like a group therapy session. And folks were able to share. The first one we had, folks were able to share what they experienced the night of the flood. And then as another go around in the story circle after those stories, and those stories were such a revelation, because when you're looking at a catastrophic event through so many lenses, we were sitting in a circle and everybody's take on that flood was a little different. And of course, where they were and what they were experiencing was different. And it was just like a kaleidoscope to sit in that circle. And it was a brighter kaleidoscope when the next prompt that we had was your hope for the recovery after the flood. And so I learned, there was a gentleman here and he talked about post-traumatic growth. And it was just something that I just grabbed onto because it was so hopeful to me. And so I've adopted that terminology, post-traumatic growth, because it is indeed my hope that we can build back better. We had a lot of problems in housing. We had substandard housing. We had lots of infrastructure problems. And so I'm hoping that as we rebuild and recover from this, things will get infinitely better.
Yeah, so what's next? I mean, what do you see just in the next couple of weeks, even? What's on the near horizon? How do people still need help and support?
Well, we have been going out, any support that is rolled into us, we have been writing $250 checks and giving them to individual families. But we've not been taking applications for those because we didn't want to have to weed through all that, and we are shorthanded to go through something that'd be so take labor intensive. It'd just take a lot of effort. So we found it a lot easier to just go out beating the bushes, is what I call it. And we just go out and drive up and down through the communities and the hills and the hollers, and not just our personal community, but we've wrote checks all over this county when we go out to see the devastation and talk to the people. And when you're standing on their property and you can see that, there's mud and debris way up on their fence, even though they might have gotten their house cleaned out, that there's issues there. And then we found folks living in campers and folks living in tents. And the tents are really the thing that, as the temperature drops on these nights and the temperature gets down in the 50s, it's really worrisome, and it's really hard. For me, it's hard to write somebody a $250 check when you wish it could be a $2,500 check. And we just have to proceed doing with what we have to do with. But knowing that, if we could get campers in here to put the tent people in, it would be so helpful. And then we could give them blankets and a heater. And I myself lived for 5 years in a camper, so I know that can be done. But now I've never tried to live through the winter in a tent, and I'm not thinking that's going to be doable. And I'm worried about that. There's a social worker came here to get supplies, and I took her in the room. We had to shift our supplies out of this room. This room was full of supplies. But when we reopened the bakery, we had to shift them to other areas of the building and grounds. And we went in, and what she wanted was diapers in secure packaging so that they would not get wet for the people living in tents with babies. And it's just really, and I'm like, oh my, what can we do? And winter is coming on, and I'm worried about it, Leslie. I'm just seriously, as the temperature drops, I'm really uncomfortable about it. And so I just keep hoping that that as a united effort, I keep holding on to Mother Teresa's, we can just do small things with great love. Her adage, I just keep thinking that if enough of us can do a small thing with great love, then we can lift them up out of the mud.
No, Glenn, yes. Such words of wisdom. You're making me tear up.
It's just really, school started back here yesterday. And there was already a great chasm between the haves and the have-nots. And then I'm sure there were a lot more have-nots yesterday. and then some of the ones that didn't have anyway, lost everything they had. And I just I was glad the kids got to go back to school for a diversion from the misery, but then I worried about their shoes, about their backpacks. Because I know once they get to school, they'll be fed and taken care of, but I just worried about all that yesterday. And but we've got in school supplies and put out a call for folks to come and get what they need. And we've got some really cute backpacks. And day before yesterday, we were able to take a group of kids on a field trip to kind of get them up out of here so that when they returned after a really hard summer break to school, they'd have, I'm sorry,
No, it's totally understandable.
something to talk about.
People are sending you big love in the chat too, Gwen.
Thank you. But we wanted them to have something to talk about rather than the flood. And so we made a push, and we took 10 of them and took them down to Pigeon Forge and let them ride the go-karts. And we were going to take them to Dollywood. And when we got down there, Dollywood had closed, and I never knew of it being closed, and it was my bad planning. But we still took them to the aquarium, and that was awesome. And let them ride the go-karts and that sort of thing. And they rode the giant Ferris wheel over at the island. And it was a long day, but it was time well spent. It was our little after school. We had a project last fall called Story Catcher, where we taught them to tell and write their own stories. And some of them were too little to write their own stories, so they can tell their own story. But
the great tradition of storytelling.
Yeah. So anyway, we took that little group of kids, the ones that could go, and took them down there for the day.
Well, how can we help, Gwen? I mean, I know we're going to have other presenters on today who will probably give us additional ideas of, if there's funding we can forward, folks may be closer to home to you. Somebody asked if we could donate school supplies, or, what do you think some of the immediate needs are that maybe other folks in Central Appalachia can help you with?
Well, there's always a need for cleaning supplies, paper towels, garbage bags, that kind of stuff. There's always those needs. The governor allotted more food stamps that they could sign up for on the 24th of August, but I'm guessing that those are already gone, because they had to replenish anything that they had in their freezer or refrigerator, because while the power was out, I'm sure that all their food was ruined. And I was really happy that Governor Beshear had the wherewithal to get them that much going on, in addition to the other things that they were putting in place. But so there's always a big need. And for the kids going to school, I don't know. What we did was we wrote those $250 checks. And if families had kids, we told them that if they would go and buy shoes with that money and bring us a receipt, we would reimburse them for the shoes. And so that way, and we told them, take them and get them what they want, not just the bare essentials. Because I know how it is to go to school when you don't have as much as the other kids do.
Yeah.
And I've just been really worried about that, Leslie. But Hemphill Community Center has a website with a contribute button, and Black Sheep Bakery has one. So if you feel inclined, you can get some funds to us that way, and we'll get them right to the ground, because we're not ciphering off anything. I'm a volunteer here. We pay the bakery staff. But there's nobody that makes a big old salary here. All the wages are hourly wages. So, and then the ones who've been working the distribution center, they're volunteers as well. So really the only ones that get paid here are the bakery staff. So we're not taking any of the funds. We're just trying to get it right to the ground. And that kind of, you know, at the risk of making somebody mad, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you my thoughts on some things.
Please do.
Okay, the Red Cross, I have donated to them in the past. I will never donate to them again,
Oh, no.
because I do not know anyone in this situation who has gotten one thin dime from them. And so, I mean, if somebody's got it and can tell me about it, I wish they would, because I'm sadly disappointed in them. FEMA has not done well by us. There's some organizations that are getting money to the ground, because they brought it to us so we could get it to the ground for them, because they were not familiar with the area up in here. So there are some folks. One of those slides that was among those slides was of Sonora Childers, and she is Tyler Childers' wife, and she came here with money. The East Kentucky flood relief folks, they brought money, and we put it right on the ground where it needed to go. There are some folks who have they have eliminated the administration fees and are getting the money where it needs to go. And I know that, I'm not saying that that I don't want people in these big organizations to have a salary, but what I'm saying is it has to go through so many layers that by the time it gets to grassroots, there's nothing left. And so that's just some things that I've gleaned during this, because I had never experienced a disaster before, and it's been an eye-opener.
Well, to your point, Gwen, we did put in the chat those links so that people can donate directly and feel confident that you are putting any funding donated to good use. We really respect and just, so much acknowledge the hard work and your other fellow community members have made.
Thank you.
It is, I think we all learned a new term too, post-traumatic growth here this morning. And I think as we're all, challenged by climate disruptions right now, this can be happening to any one of us. I think Hailey also put that in the chat. It's Eastern Kentucky perhaps in July, but it could be any community in the future. So we've got to acknowledge the hard work of volunteers and dedicated community members have, the efforts that you've put together. So thank you so much. I know this is an excruciatingly busy and crazy time for you. So we thank you so much for being on with us this morning and sharing your story.
Thank you. And thank you all for the sweet words in the chat. I appreciate you. And just channel us some energy up in here, some positive vibes, if you will, because we can use all of them we can get as we keep doing what we're doing. And it's going to take, I believe, years to come out of this. and we're making baby steps. 2 months later, it's better, but we got a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, we hope that through your modeling, we can all figure out how to build back better after these horrible catastrophes as well.
I
So
told the black sheep that the next time disaster hits somebody else, we're taking a road trip.
exactly. Yeah.
We
Okay.
gotta reciprocate.
Love you, babe. Hope I see you in person sometime soon.
Y'all take care.
Okay. We're going to hand it over to Jennifer now. I don't know. How do we go on after that? Gwen, you've inspired us.
Thank you.
Very much so. Yeah, I'm not quite certain how we go on. Yeah, thank you very much, Gwen. I have had the pleasure of eating your fabulous pizza many times. And one of the bright spots for me in the last 8 weeks has been taking flood relief applications at Hemp Hill one afternoon, and sitting there talking with Gwen. Being in that space was one of the more nurturing things I have done in the last 8 weeks for my heart and soul. So thank you, Gwen. So
yeah, we're all choked up. I know. I'll just put this slide up quickly, Jennifer, and let you take it away.
Thank you, Leslie. As Gwen so eloquently and wisely talked, it has been a devastating and hard couple of months here in Eastern Kentucky. I'm Jennifer Weber. I work with Community Farm Alliance. I live near Hazard, Kentucky, in Perry County, downstream from Gwen, and my community was also severely impacted by this flood. And being with CFA, I focus a lot on food and ag systems and getting out to see our farmers and figuring out how to feed people, much like Gwen. What I saw with this flood was just the river flood. There was water in places folks have never seen water before. And flash flooding left a tsunami-like devastation in many places, including Neon, which is right below Gwen. We have lots of farmers who completely lost their crops due to flooding at peak harvest time. We had folks who, home gardeners who are relying on those items from their gardens to feed themselves during the summer. We have a lot of folks who had already put stuff back for the winter that was flooded out. We've seen farmers whose hay in their barn was completely flooded and their fields were completely flooded. So the hay they put up is bad and they're not getting their fall cutting. We've seen barns completely wash away with generations of accumulation of tools and equipment, and that right piece of fencing or that right piece of whatever was left over. We've seen community stores wiped out. And despite all of this devastation, one of the things I saw was that very quickly we had a network of people in this region who were working together and working to help folks through the crisis into the response where we are now and hopefully into our long-term recovery. And I think one of the reasons we were able to do this so quickly is because we had a strong network of organizations and people who were already engaged and collaborating and doing this work. Extension was fabulous in our area. Groups like Hemp Hill, Cane Kitchen, lots and lots of different organizations across the region. the panel today is going to focus on 3 nonprofits who really hit the ground running. We have Community Farm Alliance, Mountain Association, and Grow Appalachia. And so we're each going to talk a little bit about how our organizations responded and what's next in recovery, and hopefully have a little bit of time for questioning before we go into an active break. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Martin Richards with Community Farm Alliance.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to, let's see, make it all happen. Okay, can you see my screen? Somebody say yes, because I can't.
Yes.
I see
Yes.
some thumbs. All right. Anyway, phew. Gwen, that was so powerful. And these few pictures don't do it nearly as justice to Gwen's story. And a reminder, right, 40 people lost their lives in this, in what was supposedly a once in a 1,000-year event, but is likely, it's likely to be less than 1,000 years for the next one. And that's one of the big problems. All right, let me get it to, all right. So, this was the initial impact that that we determined. That was just in the first couple of weeks, and it's based on a number of things. Certainly, applications to the Central Appalachian Family Farm Fund. It is much bigger now. The tally just keeps rising. But I think for all of us who've been working, in food and ag in East Kentucky, heck, in all of Appalachia, right? That, there's been a lot of work that's happened in the past decade for this. It has been amazing work, but it's all kind of like really tenuous, I think, right now. We're threatened for a decade worth of work by so many people to be lost. And it's, so the need is huge for all of this. This collaborative response, right? I cannot, and Jennifer mentioned it, cannot mention enough how much of the collaboration has been. And I'm only going to talk about one piece of the collaboration, but it extends, to so many other folks out there. But we have looked at this collaboration in working with, the Foundation, Grow Appalachia, the Hort Council, KCARD, Oak, UK, and others, right? And looking at the immediate relief response, some things like Gwen was talking about, just getting out a couple $100 to folks just for the immediate needs. And then the intermediate recovery, what's it going to take to start the recovery, as well as the long-term rebuilding. And as Gwen said, it is going to take years, I think, in terms of the rebuilding for this. I think we have sort of moved out of the immediate, and now we're kind of in the intermediate, the recovery phase of this. We're collaboratively doing assessments. The applications to the CAF fund has been a huge source for the assessments because folks are actually putting in, dollar values to in their applications, and then aggregating resources as well as the food assistance aspect, and then working with the federal and state agencies on this. I think that for CFA staff, we have learned more about what FS, the Farm Service Agency, does in the last month or so than we had known previously, and that's going to have long-term impact too. So one of the things that our immediate group did was create this resource page. And these are just the categories of those resource areas. There's no way, and it's it is impressive, but not by any means comprehensive. So I can't begin to show you every resource on there, but if someone could, put that link in the chat, that would be great. And you can get an idea for all the resources that we're continuing updating and aggregating on that page. And then, we talked about the Central Appalachian Family Farm Fund, right? So as Jennifer said, we were able, and I mean, we collectively were able to respond pretty quickly because this Family Farm Fund had been set up during COVID. And the intent was to keep that as an evergreen fund. Little did we know how quickly that it would be utilized. But because it existed, because there was already administrative structure, because we had a review committee already in place, it meant that a pretty rapid response, including, folks can donate to it. And I have to say that, the Foundation for Appalachia, Kentucky has kind of multiple funds, and the CAF fund is just one of those housed within the foundation for it. But as you can see there, this is through maybe 2 rounds. Maybe it's through last Thursday. That's how much has been awarded so far to these farms. We haven't had the the ability yet, or the time and capacity, to go into deep analysis of all those applications, but there's a lot there, and kind of looking forward to that opportunity to aggregate and do analysis, to put it out there about the impact for it. Meanwhile, and this is just CFA, right? I mean, I tried to capture multiple, social media posts that CFA staff have been putting out to help people for this, and again, helping people to navigate, or at least become aware of assistance that is out there. And that, also includes getting Farm Service Agency, the state administrators, to take a tour of Eastern Kentucky and be on the ground. And those folks are not from Eastern Kentucky, although there are FSA folks on the ground there too. The Farmer Produce Exchange, Grow Appalachia, I'm not going to take any away of Chris's talk, has been helpful in really trying to get the food there, including what do we have available in the region. So, one of the things, again, as Jennifer mentioned, there's farms that were flooded, right? They had crops in the field, they were flooded out. But there's also farms that weren't affected. They still had product in the field, but, the culvert or the bridge or the road is washed out. So they may have product, but they couldn't get it anywhere, right? And so, again, working with multiple folks to identify sources and then trying to get them to the places that have been needed. One of those efforts has been these 4 free farmers markets, in which the World Central Kitchen and the Lee Initiative, have kind of got kicked off, provide the funding for it, and then, the markets themselves and CFA staff have been trying to work to how do you administer that, right? And it has been a learning curve, and, in a number of these markets, it is free, so folks show up, and within an hour, it is all gone. So, trying to, and I think the first one in each market was a bit chaotic, but folks figured it out, and, and how to make sure that everybody who turns out goes home with some food for it. And that has been great. And I think we are done with those now. And so the next challenge will be, how to keep the farmers markets up and going. As Gwen, mentioned, there are now, both disaster SNAP funds and PEBT funds. And so, double dollars hasn't been, utilized at this point because it's free, but we anticipate that, and all 4 of these markets are part of the double dollars program. So, we're waiting to see that impact in the coming weeks. So, what's on the horizon, right? Again, it is this kind of collaborative response. We're going to utilize the reassessments that we've got to put together a plan. But I think that also includes, like, how can, we be proactive so that when the next event like this happens, that everybody knows their roles, everybody is very quickly and able to respond to it. So that is a plan, that includes not only the NGOs, but state and federal agencies. That's why I was kind of like, we're working on that plan. And, the governor charged the Foundation for Appalachia, Kentucky to put together a task force for the long-term rebuilding. And that includes, all kinds of infrastructure, housing, and everything else. The foundation has asked CFA to kind of help lead the food and agriculture part of it. And so we're kind of moving into that. And I was excited by Ashley's and the NIFA rapid response disaster potential funding, because we're going to do it, right? We just like Gwen, right? We're going to do it. We're going to come up with a plan, but the idea that there may be funding out there that helps, with the capacity and support for that plan is a little bit reassuring to me. And I have to say, I have not been on the ground like Jennifer or Gwen. I have been raising money, and and that's kind of important too. It's not nearly as satisfying, I think, as helping folks. And then the actual rebuild, right, of the food and ag system infrastructure. And some of it is real basic, but highly important, right? From soil testing, right? For farms who have been flooded, what has that done to the soil? What is the level of contamination for it? And, and then, as Jennifer mentioned, the on-farm infrastructure, some folks have lost, everything from, shovels and rakes to tractors to barns to, high tunnels, all of that, right? And so how to rebuild that. And along with that production aspect of it, rebuilding or building the aggregation distribution aspects to it. Because I think Eastern Kentucky was not at the same place in terms of aggregation and distribution. We haven't lost as much as, say, Ohio, West Virginia, and Virginia. So it is also the opportunity to, again, build back something better in terms of aggregation and distribution, as well as the food access and food security part of this. And then the extreme weather mitigation, the climate change stuff, right? I think that, and I just saw a recent survey that came out of Iowa, all places, in which, farmers are accepting, the climate has changed, or, a quote from a year ago from a farmer, one of our farmers who said, like, well, I don't know about climate change, but the weather sure has become extreme. And so I think, the political will, may be lacking at times, but I think the will of folks on the ground in the communities is now there. I mean, at least in Kentucky, in 1 year or less than 9 months, we have had a tornado event in Western Kentucky in a rural farming community devastate that, and then Eastern Kentucky, we have had floods. So at least in Kentucky, we have seen extremes for this. And so I think it's now, front and center is how are we going to, be able to react quickly to these events, and then what steps can we take to lessen the impact? And for us, it's in the food and ag sector for that. And one of the things, so I know I probably left out a boatload of stuff on this. So I want to turn to Jennifer, and then Lori White and our staff is on this webinar also. And it's really been Lori and Jennifer who, and our farmers market support team who have been on the ground. So I will turn to Lori and Jennifer. What did I miss?
I actually think you did a good overview. Lori, I'm wondering if you have anything to add, because I got to say some of my 2 cents worth at the beginning.
Lori on mute?
Actually, I think she has left.
Oh.
Yeah, CFA is actually on a organizational break this week. And so she took a little bit and then was going to go hiking. So I think she is, I think she took off to do that. Good for her.
Well, to her credit, I mean, she is the one who, took the initiative, reached out to FSA. I mean, she has been answering, working with FSA offices and trying to help and organizing the tour of the state director and assistants for Eastern Kentucky. There was initially some disconnect, I think, between the farmers, local FSA offices, and the state. And what can FSA and USDA more broadly help? And I think we've closed a lot of those gaps. And again, I think I certainly look at Lori as now our staff expert on FSA, right? And it is in a learning curve, but it's going to have pay long-term dividends. So I am going to stop sharing and turn it back to you, Jennifer.
Okay, well, and thank you, Martin. Yeah, just with FSA, I think there were a lot of farms in Eastern Kentucky who are not necessarily aware of programs and services offered, and they are now. So that's wonderful. Next, I'm going to turn it to Betsy Whaley with Mountain Association. And Mountain Association is focused on entrepreneurship in precedented times, and has certainly done a lot in these unprecedented times as well. So with that.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All yours.
Good morning, everybody. Let me share my screen here. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Mountain Association to start, so that you have some sense of who we are and what we're doing. The Mountain Association really invests in people and places in Eastern Kentucky to advance a just transition to a new economy. And we want that economy to be diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible to all. We do lending and business support, energy work, clean energy work, training for businesses and nonprofits, and community development. Lending, we only lend to businesses. We don't do any consumer lending. So, we have large loans up to, over $1 million, to small loans, $1,000. And our interest rates are low compared to, banks in general. We support businesses through consulting projects. We have money from the Small Business Administration and from private philanthropy, so that we can hire consultants to work with businesses and nonprofits. That could include website design, strategic planning, accounting projects. We've worked with Gwen a few times, and there's probably some other folks on this call that we've worked with as well, to try to help them in some way. We help people save energy, save resources, save money on their energy through energy audits, energy efficiency, and also through solar projects. And we do community development. We were a founding member of What's Next East Kentucky, which is a grassroots community network in Eastern Kentucky. We're currently piloting a new program called Spark, which is aimed at helping very small nonprofits like Hemp Hill or others that are mostly run by volunteers. We help them to build capacity. And we're in the first year of that. We're testing that program to see how we can help, because many of these organizations like Hemp Hill Community Center really are anchor organizations. They provide very important services, but they don't have paid staff. And so it's a constant struggle, as I'm sure some of those volunteers working could attest. And then we invest in communities through real estate development, through having staff on the ground in communities. We've made a deep investment in Hazard for the last 10 years. We've been there working. Les Roll is our person there. And we also have staff in Prestonsburg and Paintsville. In July 2022, I'm going to show a few pictures. I was out in the region with Chris McKenzie by happenstance 2 days after the flood. And so we went with one of our other partners, Valerie Horn, to just see some things that were happening. This is in Neon, Kentucky, close to where Quinn is. This is the downtown area. The picture on the left is the public library that was completely flooded. Picture on the right is the Main Street, and all of the buildings on Main Street were flooded. I think they had about 4 feet of water in the buildings on Main Street. So, Neon was a community that was struggling before the flood with absentee landlords, empty buildings. And so this is one more blow. Craces Branch, which is I think it's in Letcher County between Whitesburg and Hazard. We went up into Craces Branch. On the left, you'll see this little culvert bridge. There are hundreds, if not thousands of these out in Eastern Kentucky. And so there are folks that still can't get their vehicle out of their property because their bridge is gone. And one gentleman I talked to a couple weeks later had been offered $125 from FEMA to replace the bridge. And as you can imagine, that doesn't even buy a couple sacks of cement. So we had all kinds of homes that were damaged, really nice homes like the one you see there, less nice homes like the trailer. This is in Whitesburg. On the right, that's a picture of Apple Shop, which is an arts and culture organization in Whitesburg that had 6 feet of water in their first floor building, completely flooded their archive, their radio station, their theater. This is downtown Whitesburg. On the left, Roundabout Music Company is that building right there on the right. And this is inside Roundabout. One of our lending and business support clients, Lacey Hale's an artist, and her studio was completely flooded. All of her stock was flooded. FEMA, these are just housing statistics, said just in 3 counties, Perry, Letcher, and Breathitt County, almost 13,000 people applied for FEMA, 7,000 reported home damage, and 2,000 need shelter. That's just in 3 counties. There were 14, I think, counties affected by this flood. Housing was not available to start with in Eastern Kentucky. There was very little rental housing available. And so it's not like people can just go rent a place. They can't. And as Gwen said, people are living in tents. FEMA and the state have brought in some trailers, but it's not enough for the need. So how we responded immediately, because we work with the larger ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the larger economy. We worked with several other organizations in Eastern Kentucky with SOAR and some other CDFIs with the Kentucky SBA to help staff the SBA disaster assistance centers, where folks have to go to apply. Homeowners and business owners have to go to SBA to apply for a loan in order to get FEMA assistance many times. We offered emergency flood loans to clients and non-clients alike. That was a low barrier loan. As you can imagine, people are hesitant to take on more debt when they already have debt and they don't know what's going to happen next. We worked with a lot of our partners and stakeholders and clients to get information out. Our communications team worked to, compile resources so that people would know, where to go. We offered our staff 16 hours of paid time to go volunteer, to help muck out houses, to do whatever they felt like they wanted to do to support the flood recovery. And we offered consultation with a lot of businesses around the flood. One of our clients, Gwen Christian, owns Isom IGA grocery store in Isom, Kentucky, which is between Hazard and Whitesburg. We've worked with Gwen over the years. We helped her to finance the purchase of the store. We've done a lot of energy efficiency upgrades. And before the flood, she was saving like $47,000 a year on energy, and had just last year added solar to what she was doing. Gwen is an anchor. Isom IGA is an anchor, food outlet. The next nearest grocery store is 12 miles from where she is. So it's a really important resource there. The picture on the right is Isom during the flood. She had 6 feet of water. Yes, my cat wants to help present. She had 6 feet of water in her building, and all of her product was lost. It was all of the equipment had to be discarded. She had invested a lot of money in new coolers. She had hooked her coolers into her HVAC system, so the excess heat that the coolers pulled off helped to heat the building in the winter, and all of that has to be replaced. She had some flood insurance, but it's not going to be enough to cover it probably covers the cleanup, but not the rebuilding. And we're trying to work with Gwen to help her figure out how that's going to happen. She's had quite a few people pitch in and has gotten some money from the Catholic Church, from the National Catholic Church, from the Grocers Association, National Grocers Association, but she's going to need help, and she can't borrow as much money as she's going to need to rebuild. So what do we do with businesses that are so important in communities, that communities need, but there's not a clear path forward? So, we're working with the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky. They're trying to bring in some philanthropic dollars so that we can create a capital stack, that maybe there's some grant money that can go in to go toward the rebuilding. There's some loan money that can come in, some patient capital that, she doesn't have to repay quickly. It's a real challenge for businesses that, have thin margins. It's not like she's making a ton of money on this store. Grocery stores have very thin profit margins. So that's one of the challenges for the larger ecosystem moving forward. Because we have business support services, we have the ability to contract not just with consultants who can help individual businesses or nonprofits, but also communities. And we're doing a pilot project with Wayland, Kentucky. You see a picture of Wayland there that was completely flooded. And they're looking at trying to move the downtown out of the floodplain. And so we're paying for a consultant to work with Wayland to help identify resources, to do some strategic recovery planning with them, and to develop some resources, do some grant seeking and grant writing. And they're trying to establish some relationships with some urban areas like Lexington and Louisville to see if they can have sort of a sister city partnership that can help their longer term recovery. In Buckhorn community, which is a very small community near Hazard, our energy team went and helped set up a solar array that powered showers and a laundry, because there was no power to Buckhorn and there was no water. And so we worked with several partners to get that set up. We worked with other of our energy clients, Apple Shop and Isom, to get their there was some damage to their inverters. And so we worked to help them get back up to be able to use their solar arrays to power the work that they're doing. There you see on the left is a picture of the battery that we were able to bring in for Apple Shop to help. It's now powering their, they've got for their radio station, someone donated a van to them, like a camper, and they're running their radio station out of the camper now. And on the right is the solar array in Buckhorn that's powering the showers and the laundry. You know, moving forward, what we're really looking at is, as all of us know, this is not a quick fix. You know, this is a 5 to 10 year recovery. And we know that there's going to be places that don't recover from this and people that don't recover. So we're really looking at how can we help with climate resilience planning. We're talking with partners to see about having some regional climate resilience working groups to help us think about, you know, we know with climate change that these kind of events are going to be more frequent, and we're likely to see this again. What can we do to prepare for that? How can we help homeowners as they're rebuilding to build in a way that's smarter, that helps take flood design into account? And so we're working with a group, a nonprofit out of Vermont, who's going to be putting together some East Kentucky climate resilient building guidelines for us that will be available to municipalities, businesses, homeowners to think about as you're building or rebuilding. How can you do it in a way that can make you and your business or community more resilient? You know, we want to look at youth engagement. Young people are very interested in climate change and climate impacts. How can we engage youth in some of these working groups and really bring their energy and passion to help solve the problems that we're facing? We're dedicating more resources for consulting with businesses to increase their resilience to flooding. We're in touch with an organization that does climate change mental health resources to try to bring some resources to groups and to communities, because you know, young people today are exhibiting more anxiety and depression than any generation before them. And a big piece of that is climate change. And so how can we bring resources to schools, to communities, to help create more resilient community members, more resilient youth, to increase our sense of hope and ability to deal with whatever comes? And then we're putting together some training to offer to the community about the impact of trauma and trauma-informed response. You know, trauma is a life-changing experience. It changes everything. Many people who've been through a traumatic event like a flood say that it's a clear demarcation line, their life before the flood and their life after the flood. And so how do we help folks really understand that, you know, we've tended to, as a society, just say, buck up, you know, pull up your bootstraps, put on your big girl pants and just take care of things. But you can only do that for so long before your body or your mental health suffers and you just can't do it anymore. So how do we help people know that what they're experiencing is normal? What are the resources to help them, you know, deal with the intrusive thoughts that come after trauma, you know, the feelings and emotions that sort of sideswipe you and catch you off guard and trigger a trauma response that maybe you've never had before. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, and hoping that we can help businesses, communities, and individuals as they move forward from the flood. So, any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm particularly interested in the climate change mental health that you mentioned. I've not heard of that before, and am looking forward to working with y'all on that and hearing and learning more as we go forward.
And if anybody on this call knows of other efforts in Eastern Kentucky around climate change planning or climate resilience planning or climate resilient building guidelines, please let me know. We're trying to make sure we're not duplicating something that's already happening. So if you know of anything, please let me know.
Sounds good. Thank you. And so we are going to turn to Chris McKenzie with Grow Appalachia. I know Chris was on the ground in Eastern Kentucky right after the flooding, helping to get produce and into the region and helping to provide assistance to small scale growers. And so Chris, I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris McKenzie. I'm with Grow Appalachia. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So like Betsy, I'm just going to share a little bit about Grow Appalachia as an organization real quick to get us started. We've been around since 2009. We're a strategic initiative of Berea College. And our vision is a vibrant regional food system where healthy food is accessible to all. And our mission is that we partner with organizations, communities, and families in Appalachia to create a healthy and resilient and economically viable food system. So this is kind of our region where we work. We work with a lot of small regionally based nonprofits, including extension offices and schools and churches and other nonprofit entities to help increase their capacity to serve families in terms of growing their own food and food security. So that's through our Garden Grants program, which is kind of the bread and butter. This is how Grow Appalachia got its start. And by 2021, we had worked with 6,400 families and 70 plus community partners in 6 different states and grown 5.4 million pounds of produce. So in addition to the Garden Grant program, we also do some work in terms of social enterprise, mostly with agriculture, hunger relief and child nutrition, which we have our Berea Kids Eat program based out of Berea here, but also support some other programs regionally. And my work, which is the farmer development work, which is in partnership with the Kentucky Office of Ag Policy. And we also work to build food infrastructure in the region. So we partnered with USDA and several other organizations to get, commercial kitchen infrastructure and help support, start and support some farmers markets and things like that in the region as well. So, like I said, my work is focused on that farmer development piece and is really just in Eastern Kentucky. So I work in the Appalachian Proud counties here. And just wanted to talk a little bit today about the flood and flood relief efforts and some of the challenges that we've seen in trying to address these things. And two of the biggest challenges that I think CFA and others have also encountered as we've worked on all of this together is working with more of an informal economy than maybe we would in many other places. And also just the challenge of working with the dynamics of small scale farms versus, potentially some larger scale, more established, better connected farms that, are in more traditional market channels, if that makes sense. So, and when I talk about informal economy, this is kind of what I'm trying to describe. Production for self and family is really important. As Gwen mentioned, a lot of folks supplement their income and things like that through growing their own food, and that's kind of how Grow Appalachia got its start. Production for neighborhood and community, so sharing that food that's grown is extremely important. And you know, I think enterprise is great. And another piece of that that we often miss is that, you know, folks are sharing without necessarily going through traditional sales channels. And that there's actually quite a bit of food that goes out to the community through that. Of course, trade and barter is a really important piece of the culture and history in Eastern Kentucky. And also that goes for farms as well. So even larger farms are, you know, they don't go through those traditional sales channels. They do a lot of on-farm trade and barter and things like that. And, you know, cash sales through non-traditional channels. So selling to their neighbors, selling to, you know, families, you know, whole head of cattle or something like that, instead of, you know, going through a supermarket or grocery chain, those types of things. So I believe it was Gwen that was mentioning a lot of folks have freezers full of meat and things like that from their fellow partner farms that because of the power loss or other things like that are gone. So, and these are really, these things are really hard to measure. With small scale farms, you know, they're going to have a smaller land base. They often get overlooked, and I know that USDA and the Extension Services and others are aware of this and are really doing some wonderful programs to help address these things. For example, the Risk Management Agency has been thinking through what does crop insurance for small scale farms look like. And I'm really interested in exploring that more. And we've got some sessions coming up to learn about that and explore that. Often underrepresented, have very limited capacity. So in applying for different programs and things like that, especially after a flood event where they're trying to help themselves and help their families, those things can be really challenging. They don't have a lot of farm labor. It's usually just the family itself. And so capacity is really limited. And I think it's important to think about these things as we develop programs to help, you know, farms and families in Eastern Kentucky. You know, how can we simplify the process? How can we streamline the process so that, you know, folks who do have that limited capacity can still take advantage of those programs? And of course, you know, limited income. So all of this kind of comes together to present these challenges. So the loss that they experience is going to be undervalued. There's going to be a lack of records, which has implications for, you know, insurance and program criteria and things like that. They're not going to qualify for a lot of maybe traditional ag support programs, or they're just not going to know about them, right? So I really appreciate all of CFA's work and trying to get the bigger picture of the support programs that are available and getting word out to folks about how to take advantage of those. And of course, you know, the fact that a lot of these folks are uninsured. So those are some of the major challenges that we're facing as we're trying to figure out how to work to rebuild the local food economy in the region. As Martin said, we've been putting a lot of work into that over the last decade. And I fear that in some of these places, we've been set back very heavily by the losses and, you know, just maybe in the future, the fear that something like this will happen again, right? And I think that's worth really mentioning here is that this is not the first time. This is not the first rodeo, even in Eastern Kentucky, that we've had over in the last couple of years. This is certainly the biggest, certainly the most impactful. But CFA and I were having this conversation last year about how to support farms in floods because it keeps happening here over and over again. And I'll talk about some of the reasons why here in a moment. But that, you know, we've you know, already supported some funds in the past for farms to recover from flooding. So this is just going to keep happening, keep being an ongoing issue, I think. So some of the reasons, the land base in Eastern Kentucky is funneled down into the river valleys, especially for agriculture. It's just really difficult to produce on the thin soil in the hillsides, and there is some ridgetop production, but most of it's going to be in the floodplain where, there are abundant soil resources and things like that, and flat land and workable ground and things like that. And those mountains just funnel that water right down into those valleys. And are exacerbated by a long history of logging and mineral exploitation and things like that. So we don't have a lot of the environmental resilience that we used to, because a lot of those trees and natural resources that absorb water have been compromised. And now with this flood, and this has always been an issue, whether it's flooded or not, the infrastructure and the logistics in the region, getting farm produce out, to places where there are better markets, and, their crops can be higher valued. And this is going to be really exacerbated by the flooding. Martin mentioned the soil, and I would add to that the water issues, potentially contamination. We've been looking a lot at that. We've been doing a lot of work with partners from University of Kentucky, both folks on main campus as well as the Extension Service, and also the Kentucky Horticulture Council. We've been going down and doing some soil test drives and some water test drives and trying to figure out what's there and what farms are going to need to remediate, because as you can see, the floods brought in a lot of thick and heavy mud and sand and silt deposits and things like that not only have destroyed the current crop, but I guarantee you this stuff is at least full of weed seeds. And so farmers are going to be struggling for years to come with increase in weed seed pressure and things like that. But also, are there heavy metals, or are there other things in these soils that there could be concerns with? And not only working with farmers to remediate that, but also working with the public to understand that farmers are out testing and doing their due diligence, so that any food that is produced in the region in the future is going to be safe. Because I think that's really important to work with the public to understand what flooding means and doesn't mean in terms of food contamination and things like that. So, and I couldn't go any further without recognizing all of the wonderful partners and network. And if there's a bright light that has come out of this work, it's for me, it's been, I think, strengthened partnerships and strengthened renewal of energy and efforts that all of these folks have coming together, and I think we have better communication channels now. I think better collaboration, and just we understand each other and are ready to work with each other more than ever. So just really appreciate you all and all of the work that we've been doing. So trying to leave on a positive note, I think we've got some cooperation in place. There's always, in Appalachia, we've always got that community spirit and the resourcefulness and the innovation and that commitment to place that's really going to keep people there, keep people moving forward, working hard to rebuild. And we're just going to need some help doing it. So that's me. Just really appreciative of Jennifer and everyone else for pulling me into this conversation. And if there's anything I can do to help any of you, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We have about another minute or so before we go into our break, and I'm wondering if anyone has a question or a comment to add to our discussion.
I guess I have kind of a quick question that's maybe directed to all of you. I mean, that slide, Chris, that you just put up of all the logos of all the partners. And I know, that probably is in some ways just the tip of all the folks that have really come together to do this work. Back to that traumatic growth idea, where can the rest of us, I guess, in Central Appalachia be most helpful? A lot of these summits are all about looking at the innovators and figuring out how to scale some of these solutions. Are there ways that you think those of us who are not in Eastern Kentucky can provide additional resources? And that's a big question. It could be other practitioners around food system work. It could be funders. It could be agencies. What are the most important, I guess, next step interventions and resources that you guys need?
Martin, looks like you have a response.
Yeah, I do. And all those logos that Chris had up is all great. And, and there's all the funds, right? I mean, state funding, federal funding, and all the private funding, right, has been huge. And some of that is just behind the scenes. Certainly in the Central Appalachian Family Farm Fund, I don't know who else contributed, but a large part of that money has come from private philanthropy and individuals. And yeah, so applauding all of those. Good question. Leslie, I think that's one of the really big values of the Central Appalachian Network. It's always been a strong peer-to-peer learning network. And, we're all in different stages of development just within the food system, right? And learning how that goes, what works and what doesn't work, and what we might apply, lessons from one part of Central Appalachia to the other part. I don't have any kind of immediate silver bullet to do your thing, but this ongoing conversation. And again, it's been East Kentucky right now, but everybody else, West Virginia understands floods as well as anybody else, right? So I think this, how do we mitigate? How do we be proactive? Is going to be really a joint effort. It's front and center and obviously in our faces in Kentucky, but somebody said it earlier, is like their community could be next.
Absolutely. Chris or Betsy, do you have any brief responses to Leslie's question?
Leslie, could you repeat your question, please?
How can the rest of, I guess, stakeholders within Central Appalachia help out, specifically in Eastern Kentucky?
Well, I think one, for immediate response, I think finding an organization that's doing work on the ground like Hemphill or others and seeing if there's a way you can plug in, just contact them directly. I think in terms of a longer term recovery and preparation for what's to come, I think finding ways to get involved with planning for climate change. If it's not happening where you are, find some folks and start it. I mean, this needs to happen at the individual level, the business level, the community level, and the regional level. And so, I've talked with Debbie Phillips at Rural Action. She's been part of some of that climate planning in Southern Ohio. And oh, there she is. And so, she inspired me to start thinking about that here. And so I've been talking to folks here, and I feel like it's such a steep learning curve. I feel like I don't know anything about this. How do you do this? What are the resources? So, find those resources. And if it's not happening in your community, get some people together and go talk to your city council or your mayor or your county elected officials and see what you can get started. Debbie, you want to say anything about that?
Well, and actually, I think Debbie is up next on our panel.
Okay.
After the break. So if we can actually, we are into our break time now. So sorry, Chris. But I just want to say a quick thank you to the three of you and your organizations. It is the work that you do in Eastern Kentucky in normal times is fabulous, and it has been amazing, the response that y'all have had over the last 2 months. With that, we're going to go into an active break. I am going to drop a link into the chat. And this is an opportunity for us to have some interaction, to share your thoughts on what climate resilience looks like in this region. If you want to work on this Jamboard will be open throughout the rest of this summit. But for the next, let's give everybody about 6 or 7 minutes to go get a cup of coffee, maybe return a quick email, whatever you need to do, and then come back. Is 11:32 cutting in too much time, Leslie, or is that work? We'll give folks 7 minutes. Okay. We'll put on some music and see you back in 7 minutes.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
Hi, thanks for calling Walgreens.
I suppose I could just ask you instead of using the chat, like, how long do you want us to go? Dare mentioned coming early to Just Transition Fund.
Let's see, you are scheduled to come back, go through 12:10.
Okay.
And then our next panel starts then.
So we'll try to stop by 5 till or so for a discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm hoping, Debbie, that we'll have some good questions at this stage. You probably also kind of want to share where you're at right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to do.
We have about a minute and we'll come back. And so if you are getting that cup of coffee, start heading back to your laptop. Well, and that was a short minute. So it was a nice spot to stop the music. I'm going to turn it over to Debbie Phillips with Rural Action for our next session. But please, as we go through the rest of the session, add your ideas to this Jamboard. We would greatly appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Debbie.
Awesome. Make sure I'm not muted. Okay, so I am coming to you from my hotel room in DC, where we are at the Just Transition Fund. Can everybody see my screen? Just want to make sure that is set up. Okay, great. So the Just Transition Fund is actually having its first in-person convening in several years to bring people together who are working in coal impacted communities to help diversify our economies and do the kind of work that we are doing across the country. And there is a lot of energy in the room, a lot of focus on what needs to scale up in response to the climate emergency and the resources that are available now. So it's we're in a pivotal moment. I just wanted to kind of share that. I'm Debbie Phillips. I'm the CEO of Rural Action. We work in rural southeastern Ohio. You know the story of our region, the ways that it really was kind of almost an internal colony to the rest of the United States as the industrialization of the country proceeded, and a lot of the extractive industries that took the timber and the coal and the oil and the gas, and many of the labor of our young people also leaving the region to help build the wealth of the country and leaving behind scarred landscapes and polluted water. So we have challenges, but we really do, all of us who are doing this work, I think, take an asset-based approach to the work. How do we diversify our economies? How do we help people develop more ownership of these systems and drive wealth deeper into our communities? And a lot of us do that in a sector-based approach, very collaboratively across the region. So we want to talk about the climate emergency and climate resilience, but also note that it is absolutely deeply connected to everything that you're already doing. Food waste, food policy, like the ways that food production happens currently on a global basis, those are major climate drivers. So everything you're doing already is a climate response. Anybody who's doing work in agroforestry and trying to help people have healthy, sustainable forests, you are doing climate resilience work already. So this is just a question of like, how do we deepen that? How do we help scale up to meet the challenge at the level that we are seeing now in the world? I know that Paul wants to talk specifically about the IPCC report. And I know Betsy asked a question about where people can get information. So I'm gonna drop the link to the IPCC report into the chat. just so people have access to some of the data, the projections of what we see happening in our region. But what happened in Eastern Kentucky, this is linked to our history and it's linked to climate change, right? Like when all of the timber was cut and coal was mined, we lost a lot of topsoil, right? We've got soils that have a hard time absorbing water, and now we're having these massive precipitation events. So it's coming in sheets and buckets. We don't have gentle rains that go on for days. We have broad stranglers that like wash the soil away and blow out our bridges and our culverts and things like that. So that's what we're having to adapt to. And it's tougher when we're in a region where some of our resilience has been damaged by practices of the past. So, figuring out how we're going to move forward and really promote regenerative systems that help us, help our communities have stronger local food economies, and also help us do our part to fight climate change. So I'm going to kick it over to Paul, and then I'll probably jump back in at some point. Paul Patton is our Chief Innovation Officer and is helping to lead some of the work across the Central Appalachian Network in this space.
Thanks, Debbie, and thanks everyone for being here today and for the conversations already this morning, which I plan on referencing some particular points because I've just been blown away by the narrative of experiences, the firsthand accounts of what's gone on in Eastern Kentucky is very moving, but particularly the inspiring words. I know, Gwen, in particular, I was really moved by some of the things that you had to say and your words of hope and inspiration. So I really want to thank you for that. Debbie referenced the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. This is the IPCC, which issued its 6th report in February of this year. And some of the conclusions that were in that report were pretty stark and pretty overwhelming. The report does conclude that we have crossed the 1 degree Celsius threshold that was warned about at the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. And at our current rates of emissions and things that are going on, we're likely to hit the 1.5 degree Celsius threshold by 2030. What that means is that the abnormal, at least historically abnormal climate changes and climate patterns that we've been seeing recently are only going to increase. That is to say that they're only going to continue to intensify. The way that the IPCC kind of looks at all of these different issues is it based upon the best scientific research available. It determines whether a projection is high confidence, very high confidence, medium confidence in terms of the data that we have available. So it's a really helpful document to look at with respect to thinking about what has been projected and what the likelihood of those scenarios are. There is a fact sheet that's due out here soon that particularly is going to focus on new data that's being mined related to food and agriculture in particular. So we anticipate that before the year is out, which will give us, I think, a much more detailed summary of where we're at in terms of food distribution, but also food yields. The estimates right now that are being assessed with high confidence is that we're probably going to be looking at decreases in food yields, particularly wheat, corn, and staple crops. They anticipate that we're going to see a 30% drop in those yields by 2050. So much of our staple crops are at high risk at this point in time. With very high confidence, they have projected that we're looking at risk to national security as a result of food loss and disruptions in the food system. That particularly for North America, that we're going to see some major changes in terms of the suitability ranges for particular agricultural products. That includes some of those staple crops, but also fisheries. And that we're going to see intensified production losses of key crops with high confidence, livestock with medium confidence, fisheries with high confidence, and aquaculture products with medium confidence. So we've kind of already heard today how current climate shifts are impacting our region with major flooding activity. It's challenged our people, our governmental responses and resources. Many of our communities have been decimated by these heavy rains, the horrible effects that we're hearing about that have been felt by our friends and families in Eastern Kentucky. And again, Gwen, thank you so much for sharing your story. But also, I want to say how grateful I am, Jennifer, for you sharing some of the details and challenges that farmers have experienced due to flash flooding, the barns washing away that you described, materials lost, fields underwater. I think it's important for us to hear about these things and see the images of what's happening in our region, but I'm particularly grateful to hear about the network of people who are coming together and responding in the face of these crises and challenges. So despite all of these, really real effects of climate change on our region and the recent flooding in Kentucky that's been described as having the intensity of a once in 1,000-year flood, the IPCC report indicates with high confidence that our region will continue to be inundated with these high levels of precipitation, high confidence that we're going to face more risk of intense flooding and mudslides. On the other hand, I think the Central Appalachian region is described as being kind of a Goldilocks zone with respect to climate change effects. That is, despite increasing rainfall and precipitation, our temperatures are going to continue to be pretty endurable. We're not going to see the desertification that's plaguing a lot of other regions of our country, but also the world on the whole. I just got back from a trip to Greece that we had planned before COVID, and it was amazing just to see the desertification of some of the landscape that I had visited 5 and 10 years ago, completely just arid, and wildfires now stretching across the country, wiping out huge orchards and farms. It's pretty widespread, and from the accounts I'm hearing from folks that I'm friends with out west, it's very common to see that there as well. So that's not necessarily going to be our challenges for our region, because we are in this Goldilocks zone where we're going to continue to have good rates of precipitation. Unfortunately, intensified rates of precipitation. And so with changes in climate, we're going to need to look towards what kind of strategic planning can we have to adapt to our region's changing needs. And I'm grateful for some of Martin's comments about the need for collaborative, proactive planning to respond to long-term building and infrastructure with respect to climate change. And Betsy for discussing how we have a need to rebuild in a climate resilient way. I think all of these points really speak to the needs of our region, but particularly what so many of the organizations that are represented here are able to contribute, and how working together we can deal with some of these issues of increased precipitation. We're going to need to think about how we can capture more of this fresh water, particularly as many other parts of our country don't have that resource available to them. It's going to create a need for us to consider new questions of how to build climate adaptive pad infrastructure, how environmental restoration efforts and forest farming can offset some of the risks of mudslides and topsoil loss. I think we can say of our region and the people that live here that we're adaptive, and many of these new challenges really can be golden opportunities for our economies and communities when we apply Appalachian ingenuity to solving them. And Debbie, I see you wanted to.
Yeah, before you jump to Ken, I'm going to share a couple more resources and just want to share what those are. Like I mentioned, the things that are climate drivers, but also solutions. So I just want to make sure we get in your hands some of these tools. So Drawdown talks about like what the major climate drivers are. And everybody thinks about energy, right? Everybody thinks about like cars and coal-fired power plants and all that stuff. And that is real, but food, the way food is produced is big. The waste that exists across so many industries is big. So a lot of the work that is happening across the Central Appalachian Network on food systems and waste reduction and circular economy, that's all really important. So Drawdown has a lot of information where they actually analyzed and ranked different activities based on like how much they're contributing to climate change. And then in regeneration, there's a lot of focus on solutions. So those are some really good resources that people in our community are using to have like book discussion groups and start to figure out how all of us take our work and orient toward climate resilience and mitigation. So that they may or may not be of use to you, but there are folks who've been doing a lot of deep analysis and trying to break it down in a pragmatic way that I think is easy to connect to, because the data can just be kind of soul crushing. Like you look at, you get asked a question about what keeps you up at night. It's this stuff, right? Like it's hard. And we do need, like, the person who put in the Jamboard about like trauma-informed response to things and how do we help people hold on to hope, like that is so important, because this stuff is really, really hard, but all the things that you're doing help. So I think that's a big part of the reason that CAN is trying to like have this through line of now talking about climate resilience and looking at restoration. I know Paul wants to get to talking about that. I just wanted to try to toss a couple resources out there as well. So.
No, I think those resources are extremely important, and thank you for bringing those up and sharing those with the group. I am very excited about some of the opportunities that are in front of us, particularly with respect to the Central Appalachian Network, because I do think that CAN has a unique opportunity to really pull together many of the organizations that are represented here and others that are not, to help approach many of these challenges. The CAN working groups, of course, are going to be essential in understanding how we build back and how we prepare for some of the future projections related to climate change and related to our aging infrastructure. It's no secret that we need more farmers in our region, and we need more access to food at the local level and local economies. And I really want to emphasize that and say that so many of the folks that are on this call have been really inspiring, talking about those things. And I know they've been leading that work for quite some time. And so that's really exciting to see already that many of the resources in our communities exist within this larger network, so that we can share best practices, and so that we can face some of these challenges more successfully. I think just like our CAN has a diversity, inclusion, and equity committee that is a through-line committee that stretches across all of CAN's working groups. Similarly, we've made a call for there to be a climate resilience and adaptation through-line committee that will help us going forward in this kind of work, because really there's not an area that climate change isn't affecting, and there is a definite need for us to have this discussion on each level, whether it's related to pad infrastructure, whether even in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equity. Certainly there are discussion points there that we need to be approaching with respect to climate change. How does climate change impact our DI work? How does the DI work impact climate change? And certainly, with some of the projections of increasing sea level rise and internal migration within the United States, folks are probably, if they're not already, moving to our area because of we sit in this Goldilocks zone, and there's going to be more folks coming in. And I think that we can talk about that in terms of diversity, inclusion, and equity, but also how do we build on the resources that are available here? How do we take this challenge that's facing us and turn it into an opportunity for the Central Appalachian region? So at the last CAN steering committee meeting, the steering committee did vote to form a climate resilience and adaptation through-line committee to really help with all of this work that we're trying to engage in and the challenges that are in front of us. And I want to be sure that anyone who wants to engage with this group and be a part of this group has the opportunity to do so. We really want to make sure we have representation from each of the different working groups in CAN, from organizations throughout the region, and certainly try to get as much input in the direction that we can be going as possible. I know Fairleigh sent out a Google form that asked folks if they wanted to be engaged in this new committee and be a part of it. I'm going to real quickly here copy that form and put it in the chat so that folks can fill it out. It's very brief and just kind of asks for contact information, so that we can make sure that anyone who wants to engage is able to do that. And we're going to probably be looking at trying to send out an invitation for a meeting early next week and figure out what is best in the coming month or so for folks to get together. And that'll, of course, be by Zoom. Debbie, did you want to say something?
I'm just going to jump in because I want to share a few more things before we open for discussion, because we do need to keep some time for that. So the working groups, you're familiar with the Food and Ag Systems Working Group and the different ways that that has focused into like PAD and food access and beginning farmers and really getting deeper into that work collaboratively. There's a similar working group in reuse and looking at ways that we can help things get to where they can be of most benefit and not end up in the landfill. And there's a new one forming around restoration economy, because a lot of us have been doing that work. So looking at whether it's watershed restoration or tree planting or riparian work or agroforestry, those of us who've been engaged in that kind of work are we've been part of the Reclaiming Appalachia Coalition, but really want to deepen that across all of Central Appalachia as well. So people who are doing kind of landscape-based practices, that will be another space to engage in that. And we're at a moment of opportunity. I've been in DC more in the last month than I have in the last like 3 or 4 years, because there's a lot of stuff happening right now. This administration has made a huge commitment not only to justice for energy impacted communities and underserved communities, right? Through Justice 40, there is a clear executive directive that these federal funds that are coming out, like 40% of it is supposed to go into communities like ours, right? And there's a huge amount of money coming out to specifically respond to the climate emergency. And the agency personnel are under tremendous pressure to move money fairly quickly because the need is great, and who knows what happens in politics, right? So those of us who have been in these dense networks in the region through Central Appalachian Network have a huge responsibility to help bring this money to the ground and out to the community organizations, the folks in the hills and hollers and on the farms who are doing the work. So we are still waiting with fingers crossed for any word on the smaller bucket of money under climate smart commodities. Last week, they announced the big money that's focusing on climate smart ag and forestry, like for commodity production, those larger farmers that are doing like big commodity production. But there is a smaller bucket of money, the $5 million size grants that is going to be available to do like landowner payments for implementing climate smart ag and forestry practices. So whether we get ours or other folks in the region get theirs, like this has there's an investment, right? There's money coming to go behind all of this rhetoric to try to help pay for the upfront costs of installing some of these systems that might be more expensive than just carrying on with the existing agricultural practices. So just everybody, like it's awful to like get these huge applications and have to jump and like get them done in 2 weeks or whatever. But this is a moment. And as much as we can try to flow this money through to the people who are doing the work right, like in our communities, and the people we know and trust and our friends and neighbors, like the better. So we are going to have to work hard to get money where it's going to do the most good in our region. But because we know that this Central Appalachian region is going to be a place that we can still grow food when other parts of the country can't, like we've got to do it. We've got to rebuild in a way that contributes to resiliency. So lots going on, and it's coming at us fast, and we just got to take a deep breath and kind of hold on to each other and have each other's backs and keep this stuff flowing. So I promised Leslie and Jennifer that we'd stop at about 5 till, because you all probably have a lot to say as well. So discussion and questions.
The only thing I will add is we are using some CAN acronyms. You've heard us say PAD a lot, which is processing, aggregation, and distribution. Although the P can be both processing and production, depending on how we're framing it. I'm wondering, I think, we have until 10 after, Debbie and Paul. I'm just wondering, Debbie, if you could just give some highlights from the Just Transition Conference. And I mean, I know a lot of people from Central Appalachia have shown up this week, but what are you guys feeling together? And then what about some of our other colleagues, working at the national level?
Yeah, so, well, Betsy, please tell Peter when I walked out from his panel discussion, it was because I had to come here. So, some of the themes that I hear emerging, like some of the speakers, there was a discussion yesterday about the 5 stages of grief, right? And like when things change dramatically, if an employer leaves a community, or if an industry is changing dramatically, the way the energy industry is, it is not at all helpful for people to come from this intellectual policy perspective and say, well, we needed to change anyway, so get over it and move on. Like, this is people's jobs and their families and whether their kids are able to stay in their communities. And like, we all need to take a breath and like hold space like for people while they're going through these like really huge disruptions, because there is opportunity and there's real grief, and that it's like real. So that was like a big discussion point yesterday that a lot of people resonated with. We also talked about like, Hailey, you mentioned in the chat that, folks will come if they can work remotely, if we have broadband. But a lot of the climate refugees who are showing up in our communities now are people of means, people who are like in somewhere in California where everything's on fire, and they're like paying cash for land, sight unseen, and the potential for like region-wide gentrification is huge. Like all of the challenges related to affordable housing and access to land and clean water, like if we want people to be able to, like, farmers already like have a really hard time. That is a like just scraping by and hanging on by your fingernails kind of business. So, we've got to be really smart about land use and land access and access to housing. So that was a big point of discussion. And I think another theme was really trying to get the world outside our communities to recognize the intelligence, the passion, the resilience of the people, whether it's like people from the Diné Nation who are here and, like tribal nations who like, we have state intermediaries that kind of help to navigate the federal bureaucracy when it comes to bringing these dollars in and like being in compliance and stuff, but they negotiate directly with the Office of Surface Mining or directly with USDA, and that is complex. So like recognizing how each of our communities is different, the assets that we have are different, and that we need to help the rest of the world see that there is a lot of strength and value here, and to see that it's not only clean energy, right? Like there's a lot about climate smart economic diversification that happens in a bunch of different sectors. And finally, like there's money coming like for utility scale solar right now, and that could be good and it could be bad, right? So like looking at the way that Mountain Association has engaged with Adam, who's working on utility scale solar in Kentucky, to make sure that there is like aligned workforce. So that this is actually like helping to train people and build skills that are needed, rather than just somebody from outside coming in and having a new kind of extractive industry where they like bring their workers and then they go and, then they've got solar panels over top of what could have been productive farmland. So like all of it requires that we like just get in the deep weeds and ask a lot of questions about like who's benefiting, who's going to get the work, like how are we going to do this? So in a nutshell, some of the big themes. Thank you.
How about some other questions for Paul or for Debbie? I mean, the other thing that I wonder about too is, and we'll probably be covering some of this in future summits, but there's a lot of climate smart and restorative ag work going on in Central Appalachia. I mean, maybe we need to do a better job making that visible. We say that a lot within CAN. I mean, what are you seeing, I guess, and you talked a little bit about it in the slides, but what do you think we're doing in our region that might be different or scalable, I guess, throughout Central Appalachia?
We're very interested in working to replicate the Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub that Appalachian Sustainable Development has created, where there's like shared use infrastructure for agroforestry products. Those are some of the climate smart practices that I think have so like multiple benefits, where just trying to reach folks who are doing ag to not farm right up to the water's edge in their streams, but like how can you plant crops that have value that will help hold soil and then create market access for those products, because farmers aren't going to be able to afford, you know, the elderberry destemmer and the thing to dunk the chestnuts in so to kill the weevils or whatever. So the kind of systems that have happened in the food space where, you know, like AceNet's shared use kitchens, how can we do that for folks who are doing agroforestry and try to help people have access to equipment to be able to get these systems going on their land? So that's something that I think is scalable and takes some investment, and there are lots of others. Paul?
Yeah, and I don't think we can emphasize that point enough. I think one of the things that we see in Central Appalachia is there is a lot of the shared use. There is a lot of community level organization with respect to resources. We had an interesting conversation with a large herb company that was interested in building facilities here because we have the golden seal, the ginseng, many of the herbal resources that they're looking for and that they have large global markets for. And just in the conversation, they were saying, yeah, we're looking for probably 100 to 200 acres and we'll build a facility. And over the course of the conversation, it was really interesting to say to them, well, actually, we have a different model that tends to work here where we have a lot of landowners that are growing this stuff that would be willing to bring that to you for you to clean, and you could sell it and purchase directly from the landowners versus coming in and purchasing a big chunk of property and out competing people that are already doing this work, and keeping these forests sustainable, also as points for carbon sequestration. So I think that, you know, this very nuanced and multi-story agroforestry that we do in our region that engages with multiple people, I think is something that is unique to our region, or at least not as common in many other parts of the country in terms of the way that they do marketing. And so I think that is a resource that we have, just the way that in which community level organization and, you know, getting resources to market is conducted. And certainly AceNet is an excellent example of that, with the shared use kitchen, as Debbie was mentioning, and ASD and some of the things there. So I think replicating more of those models as means for and bringing in multiple levels in which these can work in terms of the forest itself is carbon sequestration, right? Having those trees there, but then there are multi-story production, whether it's pawpaws or elderberries or you know, willow coppicing along riparian zones, all the way down to non-timber forest product kind of herbs like ginseng, golden seal, bloodroot. These are all part of a diverse economy. And I think that if there's one thing that we're learning from climate change is the greater the level of diversity, the more sustainable and resilient that economy is, as well as the ecosystem is.
And that's hard. Like all these things do take equipment. So shared use is critically important to be able to like actually make systems like that work at the scale that a lot of our farmers are working. And it does, like Martin, I hear you about how overwhelming these funding opportunities feel. I can tell you that the people who work in the federal agencies look absolutely as haggard as all of us are at trying to get this money to the ground. And they basically say you never know what's going to happen, right? Like, even if the Inflation Reduction Act funds are supposed to be there for 9 years, you know, any electoral change, like Congress giveth and Congress can taketh away, was a thing that I heard this morning. So I hate that sense of urgency, and I hope we can get them to understand that they need to fund capacity. Like they need to help us have enough people to administer these funds so that we can get it to the folks who are doing the work in the hills and hollers. I want to mention one other thing about our region, like the water resources. You know, there's a Navajo woman here who told us that in her community, and they are surrounded by power plants and mines, right? They get 6 inches of rain a year, right? I mean, like we had to manage in Tennessee last year, there was a 17-inch in 24-hour storm event, which is like a, you know, a terrible challenge on, you know, I wish we could just like have the rain be distributed more equitably, but we have to figure out how to hold and manage these water resources. The Great Lakes have like, what is it, 25% of the world's fresh water. So the potential for resource competition and for outsiders trying to somehow claim ownership of these resources is huge and scary. And we just need to like figure out, how do we slow rainwater down? How do we hold it? How do we keep it clean? Because, you know, when it sweeps through all the like plastics and chemical facilities like along the Ohio River, you know, the Ohio River is one of the most polluted bodies of water, the most polluted river in the country. And it's an incredible asset. So there are efforts underway to look at Ohio River Basin restoration, and that touches so many of our Central Appalachian states. So many of us are in that watershed. So we can also tag into those efforts, because the practices that you are doing on the land and the farmers you're working with are doing also help with that. So it's just lots of different angles, lots of different partners.
Just to throw in really quickly related to the capacity issue, I think a lot of, you know, there's different levels of challenge with respect to capacity, but I think one of the big things is that a lot of this work is on the ground, and it's going to require folks that are trained and know how to do restoration work, know how to do some of the sustainable farming that we're discussing, the watershed work, and even just simple monitoring. And I think, you know, one thing that we've been looking at with respect to opportunity for workforce development is that, you know, we have been faced with a crisis with respect to opioid crisis. And we know that recovery rates are significantly better if individuals who are going through that process have good jobs, have a cohort of folks to work with. And so we've been looking a lot at workforce development opportunities with money that's coming out of things like the Department of Labor and elsewhere, to train people and certify people in restoration type jobs, jobs to try to face some of the coming climate crisis, to be boots on the ground and hands in the field. And I think that is in a lot of ways an opportunity for us to try to solve two big challenges that are simultaneously running through our region. You know, workforce development, job opportunities for folks affected by the opioid crisis, but also many of these challenges that we're facing in terms of ecological and environmental restoration needs. So I would throw that out there, as well as perhaps an opportunity with respect to helping to meet the need for capacity.
And then what next steps, I guess, do you see on the horizon? I guess, Debbie, you're going to immediately find out the information about this EPA funding. It sounds like that Betsy put in the chat, but
yeah,
you know, aside from joining CAN working groups, what should we be suggesting people to do?
And I'm interested in that EPA grant, but it's a heavy lift. If you set up a center, you have to serve the whole southern region.
So here's the thing. I talked to this guy a couple days ago, and he's sitting at a table with Joe right now. He just texted me. So they're starting the conversation. Because to me, it looked like that. So they're calling it TICTAC, which is a terrible acronym, but it's for Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. And they want groups to help communities that don't have grant writing capacity to be able to do the grant writing for like federal funds from multiple different federal agencies. And because it talks about serving the whole region, I was like, well, that's not us. I don't want to have to figure out how to do something in 6 states because it's not us. So I think we can figure out how to have someone do like the Just Transition Fund has a federal resources center that they're standing up, where like those of us who applied for some of the EDA funding were able to go to them and meet with somebody by Zoom to get help developing our applications. So if we could partner up with somebody who wants to do that on the kind of on a broader landscape, I think they want us to do what we do. I think they, like, from talking to him, I was like, oh, that's too big. He's like, no, your organizations are exactly the kind that we're looking for. Like, we want people who know the people in local communities and who can walk with them. Somebody who could like hang out with Amy Renner in Chansey, the mayor of Chansey, where the Bailey's mountain bike trail system is, and figure out what does Chansey need? Like all the things. Like, let's do like deep community planning, the engaged planning, and try to help figure out where the different resources might come from. Like, they want people who know the local community. So I hope what we're going to find out from him is that we could create a partnership where somebody does broad outreach, and then those of us who know our communities can, you know, do what we do. So fingers crossed. I feel like there's a lot of people who want this to go well and are going to have like their radar out for things that if, for example, there happens to be a university in your community that like is used to doing these kind of things, like they might want that partnership, but they might not want them to lead. They might want the groups that are connected to the communities on the ground to lead. So it's an interesting opportunity. So I'm excited about that. And as Leslie said, Central Appalachian Network, the work happens in the working groups. So food and ag, restoration, reuse, clean energy, which wherever you're doing the work, like that's where it's happening. And that's how to connect into these networks so we can figure out who can be the one who goes for a particular grant and then help flow the money through.
And you can see the big hook has happened. We're going to transition now to our next topic. But thanks so much to Debbie and to Paul. We really appreciate the role and the leadership that Rural Action plays, but the work that you guys do throughout Central Appalachia, especially with all the various hats that you wear within the Central Appalachian Network. So Debbie, you can go back to the conference and get us more intel. So thanks a bunch. So we just have one last presentation. We have two presenters, both Laura and Lindsay, and we're going to talk about how philanthropy partners are helping build resilience throughout Central Appalachia. So I'm just going to turn it over to you gals and I'll let you figure out. It sounds like maybe Laura, were you planning on going first, or Lindsay? I'm not sure.
Sure. I'm happy to go first.
Okay, great. So take it away.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Laura Smith, the Chief Strategy Officer for the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky, and also the co-founder and former executive director of the Appalachian Impact Fund, which is a social impact investment fund located at the foundation. In terms of resiliency in this topic, the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky has fortunately become somewhat of a local expert on disaster philanthropy over the last 3 years. We had done some disaster philanthropy in the wake of a tornado that happened in West Liberty, Kentucky, in kind of northeastern Kentucky many, many years ago, but that had been our only experience with funding in a disaster up until 2020 when COVID hit. When COVID shutdowns came to Kentucky, we were very, very concerned, specifically about some of our small family farmers. We knew that the shutdown of restaurants and also the shutdown of farmers markets were going to impact all of this local momentum and the local farming infrastructure that we have been investing in for years. So we put together funding. We ended up total over $1 million in funding, and figured out how to make grants directly to individuals, to small businesses, including many restaurants throughout the region, and small family farmers. To do that, we worked with CFA, Community Farm Alliance, specifically with Jennifer Weber, who's on this call, to put together something called the Central Appalachian Family Farm Fund, and leveraged many of our resources and donor resources to put that together. And what we did is set up a committee and a panel of experts that included people like Jennifer. CFA anchored it for us. And then we also had, actual farmers that knew what they were talking about, and ag extension agents and other folks that had expertise in agriculture, as well as foundation staff. At the end of the day, we were able during COVID 2020 to fund 138 small family farmers across 20 counties. And then in addition to that, we were part of a fund with CFA that specifically focused statewide on Black family farmers, Black-owned farms. And so we were able to support an additional 54 Black-owned farms during 2020. That set us up. We didn't know it at the time, but we were building pretty critical infrastructure that would come into play in 2021 and now in 2022. In 2021, you might remember we had a devastating flood in March. It was amazing to live through, and that, we had just kind of passed the anniversary of COVID and thought we were done and coming out, of this dark place with reopenings, and then had devastating flooding that was, at that point, the worst flooding I had ever seen in my lifetime. Entire communities were put underwater. You probably remember the news at that time. So we were able to respond really, really quickly. Within a couple days, we had an application up, and we just reignited this infrastructure we had already built with our trusted partners like Community Farm Alliance. So we were right back in action, meeting weekly, taking in applications from small family farmers, small businesses, individuals, and we're able to do over 1.2 million in funding total during that disaster. Now we flash forward to 2022, and what we know happened in late July. And here we were again in this situation. So once again, we had now 2 years of building really trusting relationships. And those relationships had been in place before. Another important partner in all of this I want to mention is the University of Kentucky, CEDIC, specifically the Community Economic Development Initiative for Kentucky. Very important partner in all of this for us. These partnerships, predated 2020, but just the familiarity of working together allowed us to be incredibly nimble and move very, very quickly. At this point, I've forgotten if we're in week 6 or week 7 of response. I think it's week 6. We have already done over $4.3 million in funding. And again, we are working with the Central Appalachian Family Farm Fund. Jennifer has been leading that. And to date, it's probably a bit more because these numbers are from last Thursday, but we've already distributed over 185,000 to small family farmers that have been impacted by funding. And then we have partnerships, including with World Central Kitchen and the Lee Initiative that I will kick over to Lindsay to talk about that. And that's just farmers who have been directly impacted and lost their, topsoil, crops, equipment, homes. But we have also been funding relief efforts around feeding people and the immense hunger and food insecurity we are all now seeing throughout the region. So have also been doing additional grant making to partners like King Kitchen in Letcher County and other community centers that are at the heart of helping to feed folks. So we've had a great partnership with the Lee Initiative, and I will pass it now to Lindsay to tell you a little bit about who the Lee Initiative is and the very critical role they've been playing in helping to feed people in Eastern Kentucky this year.
Thank you so much, Laura. So Laura was actually on the board of the Lee Initiative whenever we dipped our toe into the world of disaster relief philanthropy. A lot like her organization, our disaster relief started during COVID. We were a very small organization that focused on women in mentorship or women in leadership in the culinary industry. We had just launched our 3rd class of mentees whenever COVID hit. I was actually on a trip with all of them at Maker's Mark, selecting a barrel whenever we found out that every restaurant in Kentucky closed. So the Lee Initiative stands for Let's Empower Employment. It is also Chef Edward Lee's name. But we have always focused on any issue that comes up in the restaurant industry, seeing a way that we can help and leveraging our corporate partnerships to do so. When COVID hit, we opened our first relief center here in Louisville, Kentucky. Within 24 hours, we were serving 350 families a day. We had no idea how great the need would be, but everyone remembers that it was impossible to get unemployment, that people in the restaurant industry historically do not have a safety net. So we went to our partners at Maker's Mark, who is one of our founding corporate partners, and said, you know, this isn't just happening here, it's going to happen all over the country. They were able to pull all of their marketing and event budgets across the country and fund us to open relief centers in 21 cities across the US. I think by the second month of the pandemic, we were feeding about 1 million people at a time. And we did that by going to restaurant partners and saying, please hire your staff on, keep them insured. We will fund it, do nothing but hand out meals to the community. We also focused on like family needs like diapers and formula through a partnership with Procter & Gamble. And really, you know, that was all up and running for about 8 months before restaurants started to reopen. Again, we went to our partners and said, what can we help you? What do you need to reopen and get your staff back on, get the, you know, start supporting the supply chains that you supported before. And their biggest concern was supporting farmers. So we were able to leverage a partnership with Audi and a couple other corporate donors and the Greater Chicago Trust to essentially go to family farms, fund them, seed them with $50,000 at a time. And that created credits for restaurants to purchase from them as they started to reopen. We were able to do that in about 35 cities across the US. All of that work kind of set us up for the work that we're doing now. We started in Western Kentucky with the tornadoes, and we were able to fund local restaurants, food trucks, and farmers to supply food to people in that disaster center. We did partner with World Central Kitchen as well. World Central has the infrastructure to be on the ground immediately and start pumping out food. We are very small, so we have a staff of 3 people, actually, sometimes 5, but we were able to kind of pick up where they left off and cost share with them to hire food trucks to stay in the region for about 3 months as people started to get back on their feet. We use that same model in Eastern Kentucky with farms. A lot of you on this call are probably aware of the free farmers markets that have been operating for about a month in Eastern Kentucky. We were able to do that through a partnership with World Central Kitchen. We've also been funding Cane Kitchen. The Lee Initiative's approach to philanthropy is always go to the community, see what they need, find the people that have already been doing this all along, and help them, help fund it through corporate partnerships.
And the other thing I'll add to Lindsay, because we were just texting about it last night, including with Gwen Johnson, who's on this call, is Lindsay and I learned more about water tankers than we ever want to know. But Lee also helped us leverage resources to get water tankers to several communities throughout Eastern Kentucky who did not have potable water. So in Letcher County, in a community called Rowdy, which was completely cut off from all water, we're able to get huge tankers delivered to those places. And then with Gwen's help, learned how to open them and get that water actually to people. So, you know, it's just been a really crazy time, but we have really appreciated partnering. I mean, Lindsay has been in our office a whole bunch, on the ground, cooking meals, serving meals, packing farmers' farm boxes, you know, shoulder to shoulder with us and North Fork Local Foods and others. So it's been a really great example of how a nonprofit with access to great resources can come in and work locally with a locally rooted nonprofits and local community foundation.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, we had some photographs of those huge tankers earlier in Glenn's conversation with us this morning. A big shout out to Valerie at Kane Kitchen. I mean, we would have loved to have had her on the summit agenda as well, but people are a little busy in EKY at the moment. I'm wondering if you guys can talk a little bit about what's next. I mean, even in the next couple weeks, how we've talked a lot about how to build back better after the flood, how to be climate smart in terms of building back. What are your thoughts and what do you see your roles are aside from this kind of immediate response to the food security issues?
You want to go first, Lindsay?
Yeah, I was going to say, the Lee Initiative is based out of Louisville. We're, as I mentioned before, the way that we do aid and support is by going to the people in the community that are there to rebuild long term. And essentially for us, I mean, we are not in Eastern Kentucky, but we will always, reach out to the farmers markets, to Community Farm Alliance, to Foundation for Appalachia, and see how we can plug in around food and what we can do to support. And essentially, we'll always just be there to ask how we can help, and then we will try to leverage any corporate partnership we have to do that.
Yeah, and we're going to continue to work with Lee. I actually just rolled off the board yesterday, and part of it was in recognition of, one, I've had 3 years of service, but also because we have been working so closely together. It's kind of like moved from being a board member to a true partner with the Lee Initiative, and we are co-funding things and working together. And I expect that they will be involved with us for the long haul. And Lindsay is based out of Louisville. Part of her family is from Perry County. So I think that she's a bona fide Appalachian and has roots in the region as well. And Chef Edward Lee, longtime supporter of Appalachia and Appalachian foodways, and has always lifted up our region in his national kind of reach. For us at the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky, we are the only nationally accredited community foundation serving the region. And we are not going anywhere. We were here before the flood, we were here before COVID, and we are dedicated to this long-term recovery work. You asked about building back. I think that this is an opportunity to completely reimagine things. I don't want to build back to what we had before because it was unsustainable. And we have been kicking the can down the road for so long, and we can't do it anymore. For me personally, a lot of folks on this call know my background, but I'm from Eastern Kentucky, started my career with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth as working in the coal fields with communities who were experiencing the worst abuses of the coal industry. 20 years ago, when I was doing that work, people were talking about this flood coming. They were saying the surface mining, mountaintop removal that we are experiencing, along with the impacts of climate change, which are directly driven by the coal and fossil fuels being extracted from our region, are going to accelerate flooding in our region. And so for me, 2022, it's just been this full circle moment in a really horrible way of thinking about those KFTC leaders 20 years ago saying, this is coming, and now it's here. And, compared, the 2021 flood was bad, but this one has taken lives, right? It's been incredibly deadly. And just the scale of it is unimaginable. And the fact that it hits so many, really cultural centers of our region, like Whitesburg, like Heinemann, it's just been devastating. And so, for us, we know that we can't go back to doing the same things that we have done. There are places that will not be rebuilt, and talking to Alex at, Apple Shop, the executive director there, they're not going to go back into their building, right? They will rebuild, but it'll be somewhere else. And talking to our housing partners like Scott McReynolds at Housing Development Alliance, they have already purchased land that is up higher on higher ground and are looking to purchase more land that will be up higher, that won't be reachable by floodwaters, right? So we are going to have to think differently. We are going to have to think about our built environment differently, when it comes to climate adaptable design. And of course, farmers are going to have to adapt to the changing climate. They have been, but they're going to have to, further adapt with climate resiliency in their farming plans so that we can keep our food system in place. And most importantly, I think, farmers and the community that they provide are such an important network of mutual aid in our region. I mean, that's, I think, one of our strongest forms of resiliency is our relationships and our relationships and commitment to the land and also to one another. And we really saw that come out during this flood. I mean, it was just amazing the way that everyone, the community members responded in the face of what I would say is inadequate federal response. It was really the local organizations, just everyday people who were out there on four-wheelers, making sure their neighbors were okay, bringing them food, checking in on people, bringing them meals, getting them out. And so that has been, for me, one of the lessons of this is our strongest asset are our people, and not just people, but the relationships that we all carry of care. We are leading a series of long-term recovery groups that are starting up. We're actually hiring 2 new people right now who will be the point people on this work, and we'll be working at a county level for long-term recovery groups are something that spring up. It's a model that comes from BOAD and other organizations to do community preparedness, right? Because at some point we have to move from relief and recovery to preparing. So we'll be leading that work, as well as a series of working groups in Kentucky, including a sustainable ag and local food one that are sector-based. So things like affordable housing, healthcare. So we are going to be at the, kind of center of the hub as the coordinator of that work, with acknowledging that the people in the community are the ones that do all of the work. So that's where we're moving to, and working in partnership with the governor's office. ARC, I think, is going to jump in and provide some funding for this, and are, pivoting this fall to start to work on that long-term recovery. And we have right now, I think, 2 to 3 years of dedicated funding for this for the staff that will be doing it. But it's going to take much, much longer than that.
One of the things, the first conversation I had with Gwen about joining and presenting at the summit, she talked a lot about winter is coming, and she brought that up again today in her session. I'm just wondering, what words of wisdom or what points do we want to get across to some of our federal and state agency partners? I mean, how do we accelerate some of the support that's needed, especially in Eastern Kentucky right now? Whether it's the USDA. I know Joe Woody was going to be a presenter here at this session, but he's touring, I think, Eastern Kentucky today, from what Alex has shared with us. So, how do we help them help us?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is clear to me coming out of these multiple disasters starting in 2020 with COVID is just the importance of having a local community foundation. And I think that is such a key piece of resiliency for communities. What is happening in Eastern Kentucky will begin to happen throughout the region. If it hasn't already, Western North Carolina saw flooding, West Virginia saw flooding. Having a local community foundation that can not only help to capture larger national private philanthropy, but also those federal dollars is so key. This year, before the flood happened, we launched something called the LIFT Fund, which was, we have too many acronyms. So it's like leveraging leveraging investment for federal traction or something dumb like that. It's all I could come up with at the time. But we were providing, much like Just Transition Fund in the early days, match dollars for local organizations, you know, applying for ARC, applying for USDA, applying for EDA, anything that required, or NEH, anything that required a match. We had a very short application and process, and you could apply to us for up to $75,000 in match. And that was really huge because so often we have to have that local philanthropy in order to leverage those federal dollars. And if we don't have that, we're just dead in the water, right? We're not getting those big federal grants that we then see go to Lexington or Louisville or urban centers where they have that philanthropy. The other thing is just the community capacity that we need at all of our municipal levels. And, you know, the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky is not a normal kind of traditional community foundation. We were built off of rural philanthropy initiative work, and we function like a rural development hub, same as Mountain Association and the other organizations on this call. So we're really not just leveraging or bringing in capital resources. We are also doing local leadership development through all of our affiliate. We have boards across the region. There's a Floyd County Community Foundation, where we have a Letcher County Community Foundation and a Knott County Community Foundation now coming online as a result of this flood. So we have those local affiliate boards made up of local leaders who are keeping us informed. So, you know, it's like a kind of like a funnel with a spigot. It's like we're able to capture larger dollars and then move it out to the ground to really grassroots work of where it needs to go. And so those smaller organizations that on their own may not be able to leverage a USDA or USDA rural development grant can access them now with us as a partner, helping to bring in more resources and more capacity. So, you know, for me, I think that having some kind of place-based local community foundation or really community-driven funder is really important. And those institutions like the USDA and ARC and others can invest in us, right? And have through the years to build our capacity to be able to do this work.
Thank you, Laura. Lindsay, anything to add?
No, I mean, I echo what Laura says. I've actually only taken federal funding once in my entire life for an organization. And as Laura can tell you, she was on the board and I had no idea what we were getting into. So I think having community foundations and people that are well-versed in that sort of funding from the federal level is critical. You know, like I said, we have taken one, and it was during COVID to do a school feeding program. And I essentially had to hire an entire staff member just to manage the grant tracking. I believe my grant report was over 600 pages long, and I still had to have more information. So I think really just having people like the Foundation for Appalachia that can manage those sorts of grants for you. All of my experience with larger funding is corporate based.
Great. Well, good that you can harness that funding as well.
And then, you know, the other thing is just having better, and it's hard, you know, for federal funders and public sector funders, but looking at the real barriers that exist for rural organizations and applying, because it's not just match, there are other barriers as well, and adapting and scaling for a rural area. And I know we have champions, like you mentioned, Joe Woody. You know, he gets it. We have other champions in DC who understand how to navigate these systems and also understand the realities of rural Appalachia. But I think the more that we can advocate for them removing barriers for the types of organizations, especially our smaller grassroots ones that are involved with CAN, the more impactful the work.
Thank you. Well, we're so delighted. Thank you for joining us. We know you're both very busy. But it was important, I think, to hear your points of view on this work as well. And then we really, I think, have asked everyone if there's ways that many of us throughout Central Appalachia can continue to contribute resources, financial support. If there's anything that you would like to drop in the chat box in terms of how we can continue to contribute. I think we recognize that recovery is a long journey here, and that investment is going to be needed further on.
Sure, I will drop a link soon, but really giving to any of the local groups in the region in Eastern Kentucky, from Hemp Hill Community Center to Apple Shop to Appalachian Citizens Law Center to North Fork Local Food and Community Farm Alliance, you know, all of that giving matters. We have a fund as well that's still taking donations. Lee Initiative has one. And then there's EKY Mutual Aid, which is doing incredible work as well. So, you know, giving local, I think, is the most important thing to get your dollars quickest and most efficiently to the ground.
Great. Laura, do you want to say anything about EKY Mutual Aid? I was not familiar with them until the flood.
They're great. We work with them as a partner. For those of y'all that don't know, we have a big event coming up next week that Lindsay and CFA and others are a part of, Gwen at Hemp Hill, called the Appalachian Big Ideas Festival. And EKY Mutual Aid's founder, Misty Skaggs, will be a speaker at that as well. They really got started during COVID. Mutual aid is it's a model of doing mutual care and aid that has existed for a very long time. Misty got started in 2020 during COVID with the shutdowns and just the immense needs that, you know, were apparent in our region. And it's you know, all volunteer run. Misty and her partners do not take any fees or, you know, pay for what they're doing. And it's just neighbors helping neighbors, or as they say, hillbillies helping hillbillies. And you can send them money via PayPal or Venmo, and they directly distribute that money out to people individually, or will buy them supplies. You know, if someone's mucking out their house and needs something, or a propane tank for, you know, winter coming, they aggregate all of those dollars out directly to people. So it's another really great grassroots way to move cash directly to people in need.
Great. Well, any parting words?
I don't think so. Thank you guys for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And I do look forward to meeting some of you next weekend at the Big Ideas Festival.
Yeah, definitely put the link for the Big Ideas Festival in the chat, please, too. That would be great. Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap up, folks. We've stayed on time pretty well. So thanks to all our presenters. Thanks to all the co-organizers. There's been a lot of work behind these last 3 summits. We know that it's hard for people to stick for 4 hours at a time, but all of these have been recorded. So if you go to cannetwork.org, you can always click on the link and look at any of the this recording or any of the previous recordings, and you know, advance through, maybe see certain parts and not others. You know, I won't make any comments, but if I was going to advertise for this summit, I would definitely tell people to queue up the conversation we had with Gwen this morning. It was really inspiring. And, you know, I see this post-traumatic growth language starting to infiltrate maybe many of the things that we'll be talking about here throughout the Central Appalachian Network. Any questions before I do the wrap up, or any feedback from folks? We really appreciate all your comments in the chat. Anything from our co-organizer team? I see you're unmuted, Martin, so I figure you might have something to say.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm still on here, even though thanks for stepping in. Yeah, I want to give a big thanks to Lindsay and Laura. God, the work has been inspiring, even as I sit on my butt in Berea. And I do want to say one thing. I think, you know, Ashley Muller, you know, said all disasters are local. And, you know, when it comes to the bigger picture, I think a lot of us are frustrated with international and national policy and, slow to deal with climate. But, just like disasters local, I think the true resiliency is going to come down to local and regional. And we all have a big part to play in that. So I want to thank you all. And I am looking forward to thinking about the bigger picture and rebuilding of the region.
Thanks, Barton. And then all the organizers have been crucial in putting these summits together, but I want to give a big shout out to Alex too, in terms of his representation and his ability to bring resources from USDA. It's greatly appreciated to be able to co-sponsor these summits between CAN and USDA. I think really illustrates the importance of collaboration and networks. And then another shout out to our communications team, Megan and Kayla. They keep everything running smoothly, or as smooth as you can run with Leslie involved. So thanks a bunch there. Our next summit, summit number 4, is coming up at the end of October. And we're still going to follow our 4th Thursday. I think the date is, let me look it up to make sure, October 27th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Again, if you can stick with us throughout that 4-hour block of time, we're delighted to have you. But again, everything is being recorded, and the links are on the cannetwork.org website. So I think the theme for Summit 4 is going to be a deeper dive on some of the innovative models around food security in Central Appalachia. So we'll be talking about, things like SNAP Stretch and produce perks and veggie prescriptions and the pharmacy program. We definitely hope, and I think they'll be available, our friends from the 4 markets in Eastern Kentucky who have been so crucial in getting food out during the aftermath of the flood. We're also going to invite some of the innovative partnerships with our food banks throughout the region. Some great examples I know from Ohio and West Virginia, but there's probably many more to share. And then also some of our healthcare institutions and insurance provider funders who have been really important, oftentimes stepping up initially during the early days of the COVID pandemic, but now continuing on as they've really gotten, I would say, a deeper understanding of the food security solutions that we need to collaborate on throughout Central Appalachia. So that's my wrap up. We're not quite at 1 o'clock. I'm sure no one will be sad that we're going to adjourn a little bit early for this session. But again, thank you for coming. Please spread the word. Keep registering if you haven't registered for 4, 5, and 6. The dates for November and possibly December are still in flux. We'll be getting word out here to promote those upcoming dates, probably in the next couple of weeks as well. So thank you. Fill out evaluations when you get them. Give us feedback. If you know of models within your communities that we need to lift up and showcase, please reach out to us. Again, thank you all. And goodbye.